Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reincarnated in One Piece and got married to Nami, Robin, and Boa Hancock? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Forger of Waves. The sea did not speak in words, but in feelings. For most, it was a vast and lonely expanse of glittering blue or furious gray. For the man standing at the tiller of the small, single-masted sloop, it was a tapestry of life, a chorus of emotions that whispered on the wind and hummed against the hull. He had been born in a world of earth and trees, but he had been reborn into a world of endless water. And he had learned its language better than any sailor. His name was Naruto. It was the only thing he had carried with him from that other life, a name that meant, maelstrom. How fitting it had become. His vessel, the kitsune, was a testament to his simple needs, a sturdy craft he'd fashioned himself from the bones of a shipwreck, its sail a patched-together canvas that had seen better days. It was fast and silent, cutting through the east blue with an unnatural grace. He was not guided by a log pose or a star chart. He was following a sound. For weeks, it had been a faint, mournful note on the edge of his senses, a thread of sorrow in the grand symphony of the world. But now, it was a persistent, heart-wrenching sob that vibrated in his bones. It was the sound of a spirit on the verge of breaking. A sound he knew all too well. He had spent his first life surrounded by the echoes of such pain. He had sworn to spend this one silencing them. The air grew heavy, thick with a misery so profound it was almost a physical taste, like salt and rust on the tongue. He could see an archipelago in the distance, a cluster of islands, one of which was dominated by a strange, cylindrical tower. The feeling emanating from that central island was one of absolute subjugation, a boot heel pressed firmly on the neck of hope. The weeping was coming from there. Naruto adjusted his course, his eyes narrowing. They were a piercing, impossible blue, the color of a clear sky after a storm, and they saw more than just the light of the sun. He wore simple, durable traveler's clothes, dark trousers, a gray tunic, and a high-collared, weathered black coat that flapped behind him. A single, intricately carved kunai was strapped to his right thigh, a memento of a life he could barely recall. More an anchor for his soul than a weapon. His blonde hair was shorter now, shaggier, and the sun and salt had bleached it to the color of pale gold. The whisker-like marks on his cheeks remained, fainter than they once were, a permanent reminder of the beast that had slept within him, whose power now flowed through his veins in a different form. He docked the kitsune in a small, hidden cove, away from the main port of the nearest village. The moment his feet touched the sand, the island's despair washed over him in a suffocating wave. It was a practiced, methodical misery, a plantation of pain tended by cruel hands. He could feel the fear of the villagers, a low, constant hum of anxiety. He could feel the arrogant, predatory satisfaction of their tormentors, a discordant spike of smug malice. And at the very heart of it all, that single, sharp point of weeping. It wasn't a literal sound anymore, it was the raw, undiluted agony of a soul being flayed, layer by layer. He walked into the village. Kokoyashi. A sign read, the letters faded and chipped. The place was unnaturally quiet. Doors were shut, windows shuttered. The few people in the street scurried away at the sight of him, their eyes downcast. They saw a stranger, a potential threat, another pirate come to pick at their bones. He didn't try to speak to them. Their fear was a wall he could not talk his way through. He needed to understand the source. Naruto found a quiet spot at the edge of the village, a small bluff overlooking the sea and the distant, ominous tower of Arlong Park. He sat, crossing his legs, and closed his eyes. The world of shape and color dissolved. The sounds of the sea and wind faded. He let his senses expand, sinking into the current of life that flowed through all things. Chi was a state he had once called sage mode, a connection to the natural energy of the world. Here, in this ocean world teeming with a strange, vibrant life force they called Haki, it was something more. It was like becoming a god for a moment, able to feel the heartbeat and read the soul of every living thing for miles. The emotions of the island flooded him. Fear, decades of it, ingrained in the very soil. Resignation, a people who had forgotten what it was like to stand up straight. Cruelty. The fish men. He could feel their contempt for humanity, a twisted pride born from their own suffering. They saw themselves as superior. Gods among insects. And then, he focused on the weeping. He pushed his senses toward it, following the thread through the tangled mess of the island's collective consciousness. He found her, a young woman. He saw flashes, not of images, but of pure emotional memory. A tangerine grove, the smell of smoke and blood, a mother's defiant smile in the face of death, a promise made by a little girl, a heavy bag of coins, counted and recounted in the dead of night. The sting of a needle, etching a hated symbol into her own skin. 10 years. 10 years of smiling while she screamed inside, of deceiving and stealing and bearing the scorn of her own people, all for a single, desperate hope, to buy her village's freedom. 100 million berry. The number echoed in the hollow space where her heart should be. He felt her name in the shape of her pain, Nami. Naruto opened his eyes. The blue was now hard as sapphire. He had seen enough. He understood. This wasn't just oppression. This was a systematic crushing of a single person's soul, and the entire island was collateral damage. Arlong, the leader of the fish men, wasn't just a tyrant. He was a torturer. He found near a cliff on the outskirts of the village. A simple gravestone stood beneath a pinwheel, spinning lazily in the breeze. She was kneeling before it, her back to him. Her orange hair was a splash of defiant color in the muted landscape. She wasn't crying now. Her shoulders were slumped in a posture of utter exhaustion, as if she were holding up the sky and it was finally, irrevocably, cracking. Naruto didn't try to sneak up on her. He simply walked, his footsteps soft on the grassy earth. She stiffened, her whole body going rigid. She didn't turn around. "Go away," she said, her voice rough, devoid of emotion. "There's nothing for you to steal here." "I'm not here to steal," Naruto replied, his voice calm and even. He stopped a respectful distance away. "I came because I heard you." She finally turned, and he got his first proper look at her. She was beautiful, but it was a brittle beauty, full of sharp edges and shadowed by a weariness that didn't belong on someone so young. Her brown eyes were hard, guarded, assessing him for any angle, any weakness. On her left shoulder, he saw the tattoo. A stylized pinwheel mixed with a tangerine, covering up an older, darker shape he could still feel the phantom pain of. "You heard me," she scoffed, a bitter, humorless smile touching her lips. "What? You heard my wallet was getting full. Bad luck. Someone already made a withdrawal." Naruto ignored the bait. He looked past her, at the grave marker. "Belmere," he read aloud. Then he met her gaze again, his own eyes filled with a startling, unnerving clarity. "I heard you crying. From half an ocean away." The cynical mask on her face didn't just crack, it shattered. For a single, unguarded moment, raw shock and confusion flooded her eyes. Half an ocean. It was impossible. A trick. It had to be. But the way he said it, with such simple, unadorned certainty. She recovered quickly, rebuilding her walls brick by brick. "You're crazy. Or you're a liar. Either way, you need to leave. This island isn't a healthy place for strangers with delusions." "I have no delusions," he said, his voice softening slightly. "I feel the pain of this place. I felt your pain most of all. 10 years you've carried it. The promise. The money. The hope that's turning into poison in your veins." Every word was a hammer blow against her defenses. He knew. How could he know? She hadn't told anyone. Not the whole truth. It was her burden, her secret, her shame. Her hand instinctively went to her left shoulder, covering the tattoo. Her knuckles were white. "Who are you?" she whispered, the hostie. Liddy in her voice replaced by a tremor of fear. "My name is Naruto." He offered nothing else. No title, no affiliation. Just a name, and I'm going to make it stop. She stared at him, her mind racing. He wasn't a marine. He didn't have the look of a bounty hunter. He felt different. There was a power radiating from him, a quiet, immense pressure that felt less like a threat and more like a mountain. Solid, unmovable. For a terrifying second, she felt a flicker of hope, and it was that flicker that made her angry. Hope was a trap. "I don't need your help," she snapped, her voice regaining its edge. "I have a plan. I have everything under control." It was a lie, and the taste of it was ash in her mouth. Naruto didn't argue. He just gave a small, Sad nod, as if he had expected this. I know you do, he said. He turned his gaze back to the tower in the distance. But the sound of weeping on this island will end today. Whether you believe me or not. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing by the grave, trembling. He had seen straight through her, past the lies and the bravado, and looked directly at the broken little girl she kept hidden inside. And it scared her more than Arlong ever had. The final betrayal was as cruel as it was predictable. Nami stood in her tangerine grove, the earth churned up where she had buried her treasure, the culmination of a decade of her life. It was empty. All of it, 100 million berry, gone. Standing there, smirking, was Captain Nezumi of the 16th branch of the Marines, a man with a face like a rat and a soul to match. His men were loading her trunks of money onto their ship. He held up a piece of paper. A tip. From Arlong. Of course, it was all a game. A sick, twisted game where they let her run the entire marathon, only to move the finish line at the last second. It's against the law for pirates to own such large sums of money, Nezumi said, his voice dripping with false righteousness. We're simply confiscating it for the good of the public. Nami didn't say a word. She just stared. The strength that had held her together for 10 years, the iron will that had allowed her to endure anything, simply evaporated. There was nothing left, no plan, no hope, no future, just an endless, empty present filled with the grinning face of a saw-nosed fish man. She stumbled back towards the village, her movements wooden, her eyes hollow. Villagers saw her and knew, instantly, that the worst had happened. They tried to speak to her, but the words didn't register. She walked and walked until she found herself on the path leading to Arlong Park. She fell to her knees in the dirt. Her vision blurred. The tattoo on her shoulder began to burn, as if the ink itself were made of acid. Arlong's mark, the symbol of her enslavement. She had borne it, hated it, lived with it, because it was a means to an end. But there was no end. A guttural sob tore itself from her throat. She drew a small knife from a sheath on her leg, the one she used for peeling fruit. For cutting ropes, for self-defense. She looked at the hated tattoo, the brand of the monster who had murdered her mother and stolen her life. Arlong, she choked out, the name a curse on her lips. Arlong, Arlong, Arlong. With a scream of pure, undiluted anguish, she raised the knife and drove it towards her own shoulder. She would cut it out. She would carve the flesh from her bones if that's what it took to be free of him. Her hand was stopped, mid-plunge. A strong, warm hand wrapped around her wrist, his grip firm but not painful. The knife was frozen, an inch from her skin. She looked up, her vision swimming with tears, into the impossibly blue eyes of the stranger. Naruto. He had been there the whole time, watching from a distance. He had felt her despair crest into a suicidal wave. And he had moved. Help me, she whispered, the words she had refused to say to anyone, the plea that had been locked in her heart for a decade, finally breaking free. It wasn't a request, it was the sound of a soul surrendering. Naruto's expression was grim, but his eyes were soft. He gently took the knife from her trembling fingers and tossed it aside. He didn't say, I told you so. He didn't say, I'll save you. He simply said, I'm here. Then, he did something that mirrored a gesture from a half-forgotten life. He shrugged off his heavy black coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm from his body and smelled of sea salt and open air. It covered the tattoo. It covered her shame. It felt like a shield. At that moment, the men of the village, led by the town's sheriff, Genzo, came marching up the road, armed with rusty swords and farming implements. They were angry, determined, and marching to their deaths. Genzo saw Nami on the ground and the strange blonde man standing over her. Nami, are you all right? Who is this? Naruto didn't turn to face them fully, his attention still on the weeping girl before him. She's fine, he said, his voice now carrying a low, dangerous hum. You all need to stay back. This doesn't concern you. Like hell it doesn't. A villager shouted. We're taking our island back. We'll die fighting before we let Arlong hurt her anymore. Naruto finally stood and faced them. His presence was immense. It wasn't just the confidence of a strong fighter, it was an absolute authority that seemed to press down on the very air. The villagers instinctively took a step back. You won't be dying today, Naruto stated, not as a promise, but as a fact. And you won't be fighting. I will. He turned and began to walk down the road towards Arlong Park. Just walk. His pace was unhurried, his back straight, his hands in his pockets. It wasn't the gait of a man going to a desperate battle. It was the gait of a king walking through his own castle. Genzo and the others hesitated for a moment, stunned. Then, against their better judgment, they followed. They didn't know who this man was, but for the first time in a decade. The suffocating cloud of despair had a single, golden-haired man walking straight into the heart of it, and they had to see what would happen. Nami, still kneeling on the ground, clutched his coat around her and watched him go, a single, impossible thought echoing in her mind. He's going to do it. He's really going to do it. Arlong Park was a monument to hubris. A gaudy, sprawling complex with a Raylong's saw-nosed sunburst symbol plastered everywhere. Fishmen partied and drank, laughing at the pathetic humans they ruled. The party stopped when the front gates didn't just break, but ceased to exist. One moment, two massive iron gates stood between Arlong Park and the rest of the world. The next, they dissolved into a fine metallic dust that drifted away on the breeze. There was no explosion, no sound of impact. Just a quiet, absolute negation. Naruto stood in the empty gateway, dusting his hands off as if he'd just wiped something from a chalkboard. The fishmen stared, their drinks halfway to their lips. Arlong, lounging on his throne, slowly sat up. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Well, what's this? A human with a death wish. Naruto's eyes scanned the courtyard, taking in every detail. The layout, the number of enemies, their relative strengths. He felt them all. Arrogant, complacent, strong, yes, but sloppy. I'm here for the girl, Naruto said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. And for the 10 years you stole from her. It's time to pay your bill, Arlong. Arlong threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Ha, pay. A lowly human wants a god to pay. You're even dumber than you look. He gestured to his crew. Boys, show this insect his place. The first to move was Hachi, the octopus fish man. He drew his 6 swords, a whirlwind of steel. You're going down, bastard. 6-sword style. He never finished. Naruto vanished, not in a burst of speed that could be tracked, but as if he had simply stepped sideways out of reality. He reappeared directly in front of Hachi, his right hand glowing with a soft, golden light. He pressed his palm gently against the fishman's chest. Too slow, Naruto said. A wave of pure, concussive force erupted from his hand. It wasn't fire or lightning, it was just power. Hachi's eyes went wide with shock before he was blasted backward, all 6 swords scattering as he crashed through 3 solid stone walls before coming to a stop in a heap of rubble, unconscious. Silence. Even Arlong's grin faltered. Next came Karubi, the fish karate master, and Shu, the archer fish. Fishman karate, Karubi roared, lunging forward with a powerful punch. At the same time, Shu inhaled, his cheeks puffing out. Water gun. A high-pressure jet of water shot towards Naruto's head. He didn't even look at it. He tilted his head a fraction of an inch, and the water bullet screamed past his ear. As Karubi's fist was about to connect, Naruto's left hand shot out and caught it. There was a sickening crunch of bone. Karubi screamed. His master-level karate punch stopped dead, his hand shattered in Naruto's grip. With a contemptuous flick of his wrist, Naruto threw the karate master into the path of Shu, who was preparing another shot. The 2 fishmen collided and went down in a tangled mess. It had taken less than 5 seconds. 3 of Arlong's top officers, defeated without Naruto even breaking a sweat. The remaining fishmen were frozen, their arrogance replaced by a primal fear. This wasn't a human. This was a monster. Naruto's gaze finally settled on the throne. Is that all? He asked, his voice laced with disappointment. Is this the master race that terrorized an entire island? A bunch of bullies who fold the second someone hits back. Arlong was on his feet now, his face a mask of fury. The veins on his neck bulged. You dare mock us? He snarled, his hand gripping the hilt of his massive kiribaki, a saw-toothed executioner's blade. I'll tear you limb from limb. I'll show you the terror of the fishmen. He charged, a blur of blue skin and muscle, swinging the kiribaki in a devastating arc. Naruto stood his ground. He raised a single hand, his fingers coated in a shimmering dark energy, a visible manifestation of armament Haki that was denser and more potent than anything Arlong had ever seen. Clang! The sound of metal on something far harder echoed across the island. The Kuribaki, a legendary blade capable of leveling buildings, was stopped dead by Naruto's open palm. Cracks spider-webbed across the giant sword. Arlong's eyes widened in disbelief. Impossible. You talk about supremacy, Naruto said, his voice low and dangerous as he pushed the blade back, forcing Arlong to stumble. But all I see is a coward who built his kingdom on the tears of a child. You hide behind high walls and torment the weak because you're terrified of the strong. Shut up, Arlong roared, abandoning his broken sword and launching himself at Naruto, his saw-like nose aimed at Naruto's throat. He was faster now, fueled by rage. He bit and clawed, summoning jets of water to slam into his opponent. Naruto moved like water himself, flowing around the attacks, letting them pass harmlessly. With each dodge, he landed a precise, powerful blow. A palm strike to the chest that made Arlong gasp for air. An elbow to the jaw that snapped his head back. A kick to the leg that buckled his knee. You think your pain gives you the right to inflict it on others? Naruto said, his voice cutting through Arlong's roars of fury. He dodged another wild bite, grabbing Arlong by the back of the neck and slamming him face first into the stone floor. The ground cracked. That's the logic of a monster. Not a king. Arlong pushed himself up, his face bloody, his eyes wild with hate. What would a pathetic human know of our pain? We were slaves, persecuted, hated. I was hated, too, Naruto shot back, his own voice rising for the first time. I was spat on. I was called a demon. By my own people before I even knew my own name. I had every reason to hate the world. He stepped forward, his body beginning to glow with a brilliant, golden aura, a churning maelstrom of energy. But I didn't become a monster. I didn't make children cry. I didn't build my house on top of someone else's grave. Your pain doesn't make you special, Arlong. It just makes you a bully who found victims weaker than himself. This final verbal blow broke something in Arlong. His rage became pure, mindless frenzy. He let out a primal scream and charged, his nose spinning like a drill. Shark on darts. He was a living torpedo. The most powerful technique in his arsenal. The villagers watching from the broken gate screamed in terror. Naruto didn't move to dodge. He simply brought his hands together. The golden aura around him coalescing into a swirling, shrieking sphere of wind and energy in his palm. It looked like a miniature hurricane, and the sound it made was the scream of a storm being born. This is the end, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the din. He met Arlong's charge head-on. He didn't thrust the sphere forward. He simply pushed it against Arlong's spinning form. For a moment, there was silence. The two forces met. Then, the sphere of wind expanded. It wasn't an explosion. It was an erasure. The energy tore through Arlong, shredding his attack, then his body, and then it kept going. It consumed the throne room. It climbed the central tower, the monument to Nami's 10 years of suffering. The entire structure was caught in the vortex of wind and golden light, and it was unmade, brick by brick. Atom by atom, until nothing was left but dust. When the light faded, Naruto stood in the center of a vast, empty crater where Arlong Park had once been. Arlong was gone. The tower was gone. The only thing that remained was the silent, shocked faces of the villagers and a single, orange-haired girl standing at the edge of the destruction, clutching a black coat to her chest. The party that night in Kokoyashi village was a thing of legend. Music played for the first time in a decade. People danced, laughed, and wept with a joy so pure it was intoxicating. In the center of it all, they had tried to fet their savior, the golden-haired man who had descended like a god and torn down their prison. But Naruto wasn't in the center of the party. He was on the periphery, quietly helping an old woman fix a fence post that had been knocked over in the ensuing celebration. He used his strength to set the post deep in the earth, his movements efficient and gentle. He had displayed the power to level a mountain, and now he was using it to do simple chores. Nami found him there, away from the noise. She had watched him all evening. He asked for no reward. He accepted no praise beyond a simple nod. He had freed them and expected nothing in return. It was a concept so foreign to her that she could barely comprehend it. It's over, she said, her voice soft. It was the first time she had spoken to him since the battle. Naruto finished his work and turned to her. He gave her a small, genuine smile. Yeah, it is. The weeping has stopped. She looked at him, at the quiet strength in his eyes. The total lack of ego. He had seen the ugliest, most broken parts of her soul, and he didn't mock her or pity her. He had simply erased the cause of her pain. What you did, she started, then trailed off, unable to find the words. Thank you. You don't have to thank me, he said. No one should have to live like that. He looked out at the ocean, a thoughtful expression on his face. My dream is to see a world where no one has to cry like you did. A world where people are free. Truly free. It wasn't a grand proclamation of becoming Pirate King or finding a great treasure. It was a simple, heartfelt desire. A dream born from empathy. Nami took a deep breath. She had spent her entire life chained to this island. Now, the chains were broken, and the entire world was open to her. For the first time, she could choose her own path. And her path was standing right in front of her. You're going to need a navigator for that, she said, a hint of her old, confident spark returning to her eyes. A good one. The best one. Naruto turned back to her, a brow raised in amusement. And I'm the best, she continued, a real smile, the first one in 10 years, spreading across her face. I want to draw a map of the entire world. That's my dream. And I want to see the world you're trying to build. She held out her hand. Take me with you, as your partner. Naruto looked at her outstretched hand. Then back at her face. He saw the brilliant navigator, the survivor, the woman who had borne an impossible burden and come out the other side. He saw a kindred spirit. He grinned, a wide, bright, sunny grin that transformed his face and made him look years younger. I'd be lost without you, he said, taking her hand. His grip was warm and solid. Welcome aboard, Nami. Far away, in a dimly lit, opulent office where the maps on the wall depicted the world as a personal chessboard, a man sat behind a massive desk. He was old, with a long white beard and a crescent-shaped scar over his left eye. He was one of the 5 elders, Saint Jagarcia Saturn. In his hand, he held a report delivered by the fastest and most secure channels. It was from a terrified marine captain named Nezumi. Saturn read the frantic, borderline incoherent descriptions of the events at the Konami Islands. Overwhelming power. Not a devil fruit as we know it, commanded a golden ener. GY that resembled a storm. Destroyed the entire Arlong Park complex with a single technique. Spoke of will and freedom, a blonde man named Naruto. Saturn's eyes, ancient and cold, narrowed on one particular phrase. Scribbled in a panicked hand. It was like watching a force of nature, an echo of the old tales. He placed the report down on the polished wood. The world was a delicate, precariously balanced machine of his own design. Control was paramount. Freedom was the gear that would shatter the whole mechanism. And this man, this, Naruto, reeked of uncontrollable freedom. Of a will so strong it could bend the world around it. It was a familiar stench. A ghost from a forgotten history. Saturn picked up a special, gold-plated Den Mushi, one that connected to only the most elite echelons of the world government's intelligence network. Send a cipher pull unit to the East Blue, he commanded, his voice a low, chilling whisper that carried the weight of absolute authority. Aegis Zero is not required. Not yet. Have them observe this man, Naruto. I want to know everything. His power, his history, his motivations. He paused, his gaze distant, as if peering back through the centuries. This could be an echo. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Historian's Truth. The Grand Line was a place of madness. Nami had known this in theory, from the countless charts she had studied and the wild tales she had heard. But theory was a placid lake, and reality was a waterfall. The weather changed with the caprice of a spoiled god, the magnetic fields danced a chaotic jig, and the sea itself seemed alive with a hostile intelligence. Yet, on the deck of the Maelstrom, there was a strange sense of peace. The ship, christened by Naruto in a fit of nostalgia, was not a grand vessel. It was an evolution of the Kitsune. Wider of beam and with a taller mast, built from the finest timber Naruto could find on the Konami Islands, its planks sealed with a strange, resinous sap he'd created hymns. LF that made the wood almost as hard as steel. It was a ship built for survival, not for show. Nami stood at the port rail, a new, 3-section staff, a clever contraption of her own design she called a klima tacked, strapped to her thigh. She watched Naruto at the helm, one hand resting lightly on the tiller, his eyes closed. He wasn't steering by sight. He was feeling the currents, the subtle shifts in the wind. A human compass tuned to the very soul of the ocean. They hadn't needed a log pose yet. He was simply going, and Nami, against every logical instinct she possessed, trusted his direction. "Feeling anything interesting out there, Captain?" she called out, a playful lilt in her voice. The title was a joke between them, but it held a kernel of truth. He was the force, she was the direction. A partnership. Naruto's eyes opened, the serene blue focused on her. A smile touched his lips. The usual. A pod of sea kings arguing about territory 5 miles down. A current that wants to drag us into a whirlpool. And a sky that's planning to throw hail at us in about 20 minutes. He paused, his smile fading slightly. And something else. Something sharp. Nami's demeanor shifted instantly. She had learned to take his feelings as gospel. She moved to his side, unfurling a chart on the navigator's table bolted to the deck. "Sharp how? A storm? No, it's artificial." He tapped his temple. "Like a signal, but it's screaming. It's a marine frequency, but it's damaged, bleeding out. It's a distress call, but it's also a warning." Nami's technical mind took over. She pulled out a specialized Den Mushi modified for signal interception. It took her several minutes of careful tuning, her brow furrowed in concentration, before she caught it. A burst of static, then a panicked voice, cut short. "Breached containment. The Ohara Devil. Find her. Level 7 clearance. No survivors." The signal died, replaced by a deafening squelch. Ohara Devil. Nami breathed, her blood running cold. Every child knew that name. The demon who had single-handedly destroyed a fleet, the sole survivor of a cursed island wiped out by a buster call. A woman with a bounty that was astronomical for the East Blue and still terrifyingly high on the Grand Line. Nico Robin. Naruto's gaze was fixed on the horizon, in the direction the signal had come from. "They found her," he said, his voice flat. "And they're not trying to capture her." He adjusted the tiller, and the maelstrom began to turn. Nami grabbed his arm. "Naruto, wait, you heard the message. No survivors. That sounds like they're preparing another buster call. We can't sail into that. That's 10 warships, vice admirals, it's suicide." He looked from her hand on his arm to her face, his eyes full of a somber understanding. "I know you're scared, Nami. You have every right to be. But I can feel her. She's on an island about 30 miles from here. She's surrounded. And she's given up. Let the Marines handle it," she pleaded, her voice tight with panic. "She's a criminal. We just got free, Naruto. We have a dream, a map to draw. We can't throw it all away for one person we don't even know." Naruto placed his free hand over hers. His touch was warm, steadying. "There's a woman on that island, and they're going to murder her because she knows something they don't want known," he said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "A dream that requires us to let her die isn't a dream worth having." Her protests died in her throat. He wasn't being reckless. He was being him. The man who had looked at her decade of pain and decided, simply, that it was wrong. This was his moral compass, as true and unshakable as the North Star. She let out a long, shaky breath and pulled her hand back, her expression shifting from fear to frustrated determination. "Okay," she said, her voice sharp and businesslike. "Okay, if we're going to do this insane, stupid, suicidal thing, we're going to do it my way. With a plan." Naruto grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." An hour later, they saw it. The island of Riptide, a former naval research station, now a smoking ruin. And surrounding it, a perfect crescent of steel and cannons. 10 marine battleships, pristine and lethal, holding their position with terrifying discipline. The flag of the world government snapped in the wind, a symbol of absolute, unquestionable power. On the deck of the Maelstrom, hidden behind a rocky outcropping a few miles away, Nami's plan took shape. "Their formation is tight," she explained, pointing at a quick, brilliant sketch she'd made of the fleet. "They're blockading the island, preventing any escape. They're waiting for the order. Naruto nodded, his eyes closed again as he extended his senses. The island was a cacophony of terror. He could feel the last few researchers being hunted down by cold, efficient predators. He felt their life forces extinguish, one by one. And in the center, in a concrete library, he felt her. Nico Robin. Her emotional signature was a flat line of resignation, a soul that had been running for so long it had forgotten how to do anything else. She was waiting for the end. The men hunting her are fast, Naruto said. His eyes snapping open, masked. They feel like emotionless weapons. Cipher Pole, Nami whispered, the name tasting like poison. The world government's secret assassins. This is bigger than we thought. The plan doesn't change, Naruto stated. Nami, how long until that hailstorm I felt? She glanced at the sky, her senses as a navigator tingling. 10, maybe 15 minutes. It's going to be a bad one. Visibility will drop to near zero. Good. He looked at the water. That's our cover for the escape. But I need a diversion to get in. He held up a hand, and a shimmering golden energy coalesced around it. He made a familiar cross-shaped seal with his fingers. Shadow Clone Jutsu. With a series of soft puffs of smoke, 10 perfect copies of Naruto appeared on the deck. They were not illusions. They were solid, corporeal beings, each with a sliver of his power and consciousness. Nami still couldn't get used to it. All right, listen up, Naruto Prime said to his copies. The clones all nodded in unison. You know the plan. Phase 1. Underwater assault. Go silent, go deep. Don't destroy anything. Just cause chaos. Jam their rudders, bang on their hulls, create phantom sonar signals. Make them think a fleet of Sea Kings is preparing to attack. Draw their attention down. The 10 clones saluted with matching grins and dove over the side, disappearing into the blue depths without a splash. Phase 2 is me, Naruto said to Nami. I go in, I get the target, and I get out. Which brings us to Phase 3. My part, Nami said, gripping her Klima tact. The moment you give the signal, I use the storm. I'll create a fog bank so thick they won't be able to see their own flagships. The chaotic winds will do the rest. Don't take any chances, he said, his expression serious. If it gets too hot, you leave. That's an order. Don't be an idiot, she shot back, her chin held high. Family doesn't get left behind, remember. Now go. He gave her a quick, grateful nod, then turned to the sea. He took a single step off the deck of the maelstrom and simply kept walking, his feet finding purchase on the surface of the water as if it were solid ground. He broke into a run, a golden blur skipping across the waves towards the island, so fast he was little more than a whisper on the wind. The chaos was immediate. Alarms blared across the marine fleet. Sir, multiple sonar contacts, approaching from below, massive size. Rudder on Ship 4 is jammed. We have reports of impacts against the hull of Ship 7. No damage, but it's spooking the crew. On the bridge of the flagship, the Justice, Vice Admiral Onagumo, a grim-faced man with 8 swords strapped to his back and a lit cigar clenched in his teeth, scowled at the reports. He was a veteran of the Grand Line. And this felt wrong. Sea Kings didn't coordinate. This was a diversion. Ignore it, he barked. All ships, maintain formation. Whatever is down there is trying to pull our eyes away from the real target. Keep all cannons trained on the island. The moment the last civilian is confirmed neutralized, we begin the bombardment. His eyes, hard as flint, scanned the smoking island. He would not fail his mission. On that island, Naruto moved like a ghost. The fires, the screams, the destruction, he pushed it all aside, his senses locked on a single destination. He flowed through the burning forests and shattered compounds, a phantom in the smoke. He reached the central library, a brutalist concrete structure now pocked with cannon fire. The main doors were blasted open. Inside, he found them. A woman with long, black hair stood in the center of the room, surrounded by fallen books and broken shelves. Her face was a mask of cold indifference, but Naruto could feel the exhaustion radiating from her. Nico Robin. Circling her were a group of men in dark suits. One, with a top hat and a pigeon on his shoulder, was clearly the leader. He had a feral, bloodthirsty look in his eyes. A young Rob Lucci. And for the crime of existing, The world government has pronounced its sentence, Lucci was saying, his voice a low, predatory purr. Your forbidden knowledge dies with you, Nico Robin. It is the nature of absolute justice. He moved to strike, his fingers poised to become lethal projectiles. He froze. A hand was on his shoulder. Lucci hadn't seen anyone approach. He hadn't heard a footstep. One moment, he was the predator. The next, something far more dangerous was standing behind him. Justice, a calm voice said. Funny, this looks more like an execution. Lucci spun, lashing out with a finger pistol, a compressed air bullet that could punch through steel. Naruto didn't even bother to block it. He tilted his head, and the projectile zipped past him, embedding itself in the far wall. He flicked a finger, a casual gesture, against Lucci's chest. It was like being hit by a cannonball. Lucci was blasted off his feet, sent flying across the room to crash into a concrete pillar, which cracked under the impact. He slid to the floor, gasping, his eyes wide with utter shock and disbelief. He, the prodigy of CP9, had been swatted away like a fly. The other agents, Kaku with his long nose, Khalifa with her glasses, moved to attack, but Naruto just glanced at them. It wasn't a glare, it was a simple, dismissive look. But in that look, they felt an abyss of power so vast it made their blood run cold. They were professionals. They knew an unwinnable fight when they saw one. They hesitated, and in that moment, their opportunity was lost. Naruto's attention was now solely on the woman. Robin stared at him, her composure finally breaking. This wasn't part of any scenario she had ever imagined. Who are you? She asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her eyes. Another bounty hunter. Have you come to turn me in for a reward? Naruto took a step closer. He ignored her words, his blue eyes looking at her with a disconcerting intensity, as if he were seeing something deep inside her. I can feel it, he said softly. The weight you carry, 20 years, since you were a little girl. Always running, always looking over your shoulder, always waiting for the next betrayal. Robin flinched as if he had struck her. He was speaking her life aloud. I don't know who you are, she said, taking a step back, her defenses rising again. But I bring nothing but death. Leave now, or you'll be destroyed with me. It's my fate. Naruto stopped, his expression softening into one of profound empathy. He used his senses, not just to see her, but to feel the raw, unfiltered truth of her soul, the terror of the little girl on Ohara, the loneliness of the fugitive, the crushing weight of a truth she was forced to carry alone. He looked her in the eyes and delivered the words that would change her life. I don't feel a demon. I feel a lonely girl who has been running for 20 years. He took one final step, closing the distance between them, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Your race is over. You can rest now. For the first time since she was 8 years old, Nico Robin felt the sting of tears. The walls she had built over 2 decades, the fortress of cynicism and resignation, crumbled to dust. This stranger, he saw her. Not the devil child, not the key to the poneglyphs, but her. Before she could respond, a tremendous tremor shook the building. The bombardment was about to begin. Time to go, Naruto said, his tone shifting back to one of urgency. He gently took her arm. Stick close. She didn't resist. For the first time, she let someone else take the lead. They ran from the library, Naruto practically pulling her along, his speed inhuman. Lucci, struggling to his feet, could only watch them go, his face a mask of humiliated fury. They burst out of the compound just as the first volley of cannonballs screamed down from the sky. The island erupted in fire and thunder. Nami, now, Naruto yelled, the sound carried on the wind itself. They raced towards the coastline, explosions blossoming all around them. A cannonball, larger than the rest, arced directly towards them, a whistling harbinger of death. Robin closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. She felt a presence step in front of her. Naruto stood between her and the projectile, his back to her. He raised a single hand, his palm open towards the incoming cannonball. His arm was coated in a shimmering, obsidian energy, so dense it seemed to drink the light. The impact was not the explosion she expected. It was a deafening crump. The cannonball, a half-ton of solid iron, flattened against his palm as if it were made of clay. It stopped dead in the air, its momentum completely negated. Then, with a sizzle, it dropped into the churning sea below. From the fleet, 1,000 jaws dropped. Vice Admiral Onagumo choked on his cigar. Naruto didn't even look back. He raised his head and roared, his voice amplified by his haki, a sound that rolled acro. The water and hit the fleet like a physical blow. This woman is under my protection. Her name is Nico Robin, and if you want her, you'll have to go through me. Tell your 5 elders that the maelstrom has come. As if on cue, the world dissolved into gray. The hailstorm hit, and with it, a thick, unnatural fog bank rolled in, a creation of Nami's klima tact and the storm's own fury. Visibility dropped to nothing. The ships were blind. Let's go, Naruto said, grabbing Robin's arm again. He ran straight for the cliff's edge and jumped, landing gracefully on the deck of the maelstrom, which had just rounded the corner. Its sail expertly catching a rogue gust of wind. Nami was at the helm, her face pale with concentration but her eyes blazing with success. Get ready to hold on, she yelled. Using the chaotic winds and her intimate knowledge of the currents, she navigated the small ship through the panicked and blinded fleet, a ghost in the storm. They were gone before the Marines even knew which way to fire. Hours later, the storm had passed, leaving them in the quiet calm of the deep Grand Line. The maelstrom drifted under a sky full of alien stars. On the deck, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Nami stood with her arms crossed, glaring at their new passenger. Robin sat on a crate, her composure returned, but her eyes held a new, uncertain light. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Nami finally burst out, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. She wasn't looking at Naruto, her ire was directed entirely at Robin. You didn't just pick a fight. You declared war on the entire world government. For her, Robin met her gaze, her expression unreadable. The truth is worth any price, she replied, her voice soft but firm. Is it worth our lives? Nami shot back. Is it worth Naruto's life? Enough, Naruto said, stepping between them. His voice wasn't loud, but it silenced them both immediately. He looked at Nami. I made the choice, not her. Then he looked at Robin. You're safe now. That's all that matters. He turned back to Nami, his expression softening. I understand why you're angry. But she's not her. She's not a liability. She's a person who needed help. And now, she's one of us. Family doesn't get left behind. Our dream can't be built on graves, Nami. Not even one. Nami stared at him, her anger warring with the undeniable truth in his words. She let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through her hair. She glanced at Robin, who was watching the exchange with a strange, contemplative expression. This was not a crew dynamic she had ever witnessed. It wasn't built on power or ambition, but on a bizarre, stubborn morality. Fine, Nami conceded, her shoulders slumping. Fine, but if the Marines show up again, I'm blaming her. She shot a half-hearted glare at Robin before turning to check her charts, the argument over. Robin watched her go, then looked at Naruto. Why? She asked, the single word holding a universe of questions. Why would you do all this for a stranger? Because you looked like you needed a friend, Naruto said simply, offering her a small smile. Get some rest, Robin. We see, and talk about history and dreams in the morning. He walked away, leaving her alone on the deck. She looked up at the stars, the first time she had been able to do so without fear in 20 years. A single tear, the one she had held back in the library, finally traced a path down her cheek. She was not a demon. She was not a weapon. She was Nico Robin, and for the first time, she felt like she might be home. The Chamber of Flowers was the most secret place in the Pangea Castle of Mariajoy. Before a massive, shrouded throne, Saint Jagarcia Saturn knelt. The air was still and heavy. Vice Admiral Onagumo's report is conclusive, Saturn said, his voice echoing in the vast, empty room. The power is not a standard devil fruit. He manifests his will as a tangible, golden energy. The subject, Naruto, stopped a cannonball with his bare hand. He nullified the techniques of our finest CP9 agent with no effort. His command of haki is abnormal, almost sentient. From the shadows of the throne, a voice spoke. It was a voice that held no gender, no age, only an ancient, chilling authority. The name, He calls himself Naruto, Saturn confirmed. And his ship, the Maelstrom. A long silence stretched. Saturn did not dare move. An echo is no longer an echo when it speaks its own name, the voice from the throne stated. The Asura has awakened. Indeed, Saturn agreed. And he has already gathered 2 pieces of the puzzle. The navigator who seeks to map the world, and the archaeologist who seeks to read it. The cycle must not be allowed to repeat itself, the voice commanded. The dawn must not come. I concur, Saturn said, bowing his head lower. It is time. Prepare Judex. Saturn's lips curled into a faint, cruel smile. He is ready. He has been ready for years. Deep within the pristine, white marbled heart of Mariajoy, in a sterile training courtyard open to the sky, a figure stood. He was cloaked entirely in white, his face hidden in the shadow of a hood. He stood perfectly still, his posture one of absolute, rigid order. Before him stood a 10-foot-tall pillar of solid granite. The figure in white did not move. He did not touch it. He simply looked at it. With a low hum that seemed to suck the sound out of the air, the pillar imploded. Not in an explosion of dust and rock, but by folding in on itself, crushing down into a perfectly symmetrical sphere of compacted matter no larger than a fist. The sphere hovered in the air for a moment before dropping silently to the ground. The diva had been given his purpose. The board was set. Chapter 2 end. Chapter 3. The Empress's Island. The escape from Riptide had been clean, but the Grand Line was a relentless adversary. A storm, a true leviathan of wind and water, had descended upon them without warning. A meteorological ambush that laughed at Nami's predictions. The Maelstrom, for all its resilience, was tossed about like a child's toy. A rogue wave, monstrous and black, had splintered their mast and torn a gash in the hull. They were adrift, crippled, and leaking. Worse, they had been driven into the calm belt. The silence was the most unnerving part. The ever-present wind died, the churning sea became a sheet of glass. And the air grew thick and heavy. And in that silence, they heard the slithering, breathing sounds of the things that lived here. Sea kings, monsters the size of islands, whose shadows blotted out the sun as they passed beneath their wounded ship. This is bad, Nami said, her voice a strained whisper. She was working frantically below deck with Naruto, trying to patch the hole. No wind means we can't sail. Paddling is not an option. She glanced nervously at the massive, serpentine shapes moving in the deep. Naruto was less concerned with the monsters. He could feel them, their simple, predatory minds. They were curious, but not yet hostile. His own immense life force was a beacon that kept them at a respectful distance, like sharks circling a much larger, unknown predator. His focus was on the ship. He pressed his hands against the splintered wood, his golden energy flowing from his palms. The wood fibers groaned, knitting themselves back together, sealing the gash with a shimmering, hardened sap. The hull will hold, he announced, wiping sweat from his brow. But the mast is another story. We need to find land. Robin, who had been surprisingly calm throughout the ordeal, stood at the rail, her eyes scanning the horizon. Her years as a fugitive had given her a preternatural awareness. There, she said, pointing. In the hazy distance, an island shimmered. A jungle green jewel on the flat, blue glass. It seemed impossible. Land in the middle of the calm belt. A godsend, Nami breathed, relief washing over her. Naruto frowned, extending his senses. The island felt strange. It was teeming with life, vibrant and powerful. But it was almost exclusively female. And woven through it all was a thread of ingrained hostility, a deep-seated animosity aimed at something specific. Him. Maybe not, he said grimly. That island, it doesn't like me. Before they could debate the matter, a new shape appeared on the horizon, approaching with impossible speed. It was a ship, sleek and formidable, with a serpent's head for a figurehead. 2 colossal, venomous sea snakes pulled it through the placid water. On its sail was a skull with snakes for hair. The Kuja pirates. Robin identified immediately, her encyclopedic knowledge bubbling to the surface. An all-female crew from the island of Amazon Lily. Led by one of the 7 warlords of the sea, the pirate empress, Boa Hancock. A warlord. Nami paled. They had just antagonized the world government and now they were about to run into one of its sanctioned privateers. Their luck was abysmal. The Kuja ship circled them. its crew lining the rails. They were tall, powerful women, dressed in tribal attire, armed with bows and snake whips. Their eyes were cold, filled with a mixture of curiosity and contempt as they stared at Naruto. A woman with blonde hair and a stocky build, wearing a horned helmet, cupped her hands around her mouth. You have trespassed into the waters of Amazon Lily. State your purpose. Naruto stepped forward, his hands raised in a universal gesture of peace. Our ship was damaged in a storm. We are adrift and in need of repairs. We mean no harm. The women murmured amongst themselves, their glares never leaving him. The blonde leader, Marguerite, seemed to consider it, but then her eyes were drawn to the man on the deck. A man, in their waters. It was forbidden. Our empress will decide your fate, she declared. You are now our prisoners. Grappling hooks shot out, and before they could mount any resistance, the maelstrom was pulled alongside the Kuja ship. Warriors swarmed their deck. They moved with practiced efficiency, disarming Nami and Robin, their eyes lingering on the strange man who did not seem afraid. There's no need for this, Naruto said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of warning. He made no move to fight back. He could have destroyed their ship in an instant, but that wasn't his way. These women weren't evil. They were indoctrinated. His compliance seemed to confuse them. They expected a struggle. Instead, he allowed them to bind his hands with a rope made of sea prism stone, though the material did nothing to dampen the immense haki radiating from him. He, Nami, and Robin were herded onto the Kuja ship and taken toward the island, their own wounded vessel towed behind. As they approached, Naruto felt the island's animosity intensify. It wasn't just dislike, it was a deeply ingrained, almost religious revulsion, focused entirely on his gender. He had felt hatred before, the bitter resentment of his home village, the ideological fury of Arlong, but this was different. It was a doctrine, a law of nature on this island. And it was all directed at him. Amazon Lily was a breathtaking marvel, a city carved from a single, massive mountain. Nestled in the heart of a lush, prehistoric jungle. The architecture was fluid and organic, blending seamlessly with the surrounding nature. But the beauty was marred by the hostile glares of its inhabitants. Every woman and child who saw Naruto looked at him as if he were a walking plague. They were dragged through the city to a massive coliseum, an arena of calm, where disputes were settled and justice was meted out. In the center of the arena, he was forced to his knees. Nami and Robin were placed in a caged viewing box, guarded by stern-faced warriors. A hush fell over the assembled crowd as a figure entered the royal balcony. She was, without exaggeration, the most beautiful woman Naruto had ever seen. Tall, impossibly proportioned, with long, straight black hair and piercing blue eyes. She moved with an arrogant grace, a massive snake coiled around her shoulders. This was the pirate empress, Boa Hancock. She looked down at him, her expression one of utter boredom and disdain. A man, she said, her voice like honey laced with poison. How utterly disgusting. He has sullied our sacred island with his presence. What is the punishment for such a crime? Death. The crowd roared as one. Hancock smiled, a cruel, self-satisfied smirk. Of course, but a simple execution is so boring. Let us have some sport. Release Bakul. A gate on the far side of the arena opened, and a monstrous, furry beast, easily 30 feet tall with claws like scythes, charged out. It was a creature native to the island, a ravenous predator, and its eyes were locked on Naruto. In the viewing box, Nami grabbed the bars, her knuckles white. Naruto, do something. Robin watched, her expression unreadable but her posture tense. She had seen what he could do. This beast was nothing to him. So why wasn't he moving? Naruto remained on his knees, his head bowed. He could feel the beast's simple, primal hunger. He could feel the crowd's bloodlust. And he could feel the Empress's overwhelming arrogance. But underneath that arrogance, he felt something else. A tiny, hairline crack. A flicker of deep-seated fear and trauma, so deeply buried she probably wasn't even aware of it herself. It was the same kind of hidden pain he had sensed in Nami and Robin. He wasn't being judged by a queen. He was being judged by a victim playing the part of a tyrant. The beast, Bakul, reached him. It raised a massive claw to shred him to pieces. Naruto didn't move. He simply looked up, his serene blue eyes meeting the beast's feral yellow ones. And he let a fraction of his will, his conqueror's haki, leak out. It wasn't an attack, it was a statement. I am here, and I am far greater than you. Bakul froze, its claw hovering in the air. The beast's primal brain was screaming at it. The small, kneeling creature before it was not prey. It was an apex predator, a being on a level it could not comprehend. With a terrified whimper, the monstrous creature tucked its tail between its legs, turned, and fled back into its enclosure, refusing to come out. The Colosseum fell silent. The women stared in stunned disbelief. Their island's most fearsome predator had just run away from a kneeling man. Hancock's bored expression vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine anger. This was not how the show was supposed to go. He was ruining her sport. Useless beast, she hissed. She stood, pointing a slender finger at Naruto. If you want something done right, Mero Mellow. A beam of pink, heart-shaped energy shot from her hands, flying directly at Naruto. The women in the crowd swooned. This was her legendary power. The power of her beauty, made manifest by the Mero no Mi. Anyone with lustful or impure thoughts would be turned instantly to stone. A man, especially a pirate, had no defense. The beam hit Naruto square in the chest. Nothing happened. He remained kneeling, the pink energy washing over him like a gentle breeze. He didn't turn to stone. He didn't even flinch. He just looked up at her. His expression not one of lust, but of pity. Hancock's jaw dropped. The crowd gasped in collective shock. This was impossible. No man was immune. No one had ever been immune. Why aren't you turning to stone? She shrieked, her composure shattering. Are you a eunuch? Are you blind? Naruto finally rose to his feet. The sea prism stone ropes fell from his wrists, having crumbled to dust under the quiet pressure of his haki. It's because I'm not looking at you with lust, he said, his voice calm and clear, echoing through the silent arena. Your beauty is a shield, a weapon you use to keep everyone at a distance. But I don't see an empress. I see a frightened girl, lashing out at a world that hurt her. Every word was a hammer blow to her carefully constructed persona. He saw through her. He saw the terrified slave girl she had once been. Enraged and humiliated, Hancock screamed, lies. How dare you? Guards, kill him now. The Kuja warriors, shaken but loyal, drew their bows. 100 arrows, each coated in haki, rained down on him. Naruto didn't move. He just took a breath, and a barely visible dome of golden energy flickered into existence around him. The arrows struck it and clattered harmlessly to the ground, their tips blunted. Before anyone could react to this new impossibility, a piercing alarm bell began to ring from the city walls. A warrior ran into the Colosseum, her face pale with terror. Empress, a ship has breached our defenses. They've bypassed the sea snakes. Slavers, a whole fleet of them. Hancock's blood ran cold. Slavers. The word itself was a visceral horror to her. A new voice, amplified by a Den Mushi, boomed across the island. Boa Hancock, we know what you are. We know about the mark on your back. The celestial dragons send their regards. We've come to collect their runaway property. Panic erupted. The Kuja were strong, but they were not prepared for a full-scale naval invasion. Hancock herself was frozen on her balcony, her face a mask of pure terror. The secret she had guarded her entire life was being shouted for all her people to hear. Her authority, her divinity, it was all built on a lie. In that moment of chaos, Naruto could have easily escaped. He could have grabbed Nami and Robin and vanished. He didn't. He turned to the frantic warrior. Where is the attack coming from? He asked, his voice cutting through the panic. The eastern shore, she stammered, pointing. Naruto nodded. He looked up at the balcony, at the frozen, terrified Empress. He saw Nami and Robin, safe but trapped. He saw the panicked women of the island, who just moments before had wanted him dead. He sighed. Looks like my dream is a lot of work. He vanished from the center of the arena. Not in a burst of speed, but in a flicker of golden light, like a teleportation. He reappeared on the eastern shore of Amazon Lily. A fleet of 10 ugly, brutal-looking ships was approaching, their cannons already firing on the coastal defenses. On the lead ship stood a fat, leering man in gaudy clothes, a former associate of the world nobles with a penchant for collecting unique pets. Naruto walked to the water's edge. He took a deep breath, drawing in the natural energy of the island, the sea, the very air. A colossal, golden aura erupted around him, so vast and powerful it was visible from the city. It took the shape of a massive, nine-tailed fox, a spectral echo of a forgotten power. He raised a single hand. "This island is under my protection," he roared, his voice now the sound of a tidal wave and a hurricane combined. The sea in front of him began to churn. It rose up, defying gravity, forming a solid wall of water 1,000 feet high, stretching for miles, completely shielding the island. The slavers, ships crashed into it as if it were a mountain of granite. The cannonballs it absorbed were swallowed without a ripple. On the lead ship, the slaver captain stared in abject terror at the golden god holding back the sea. Naruto clenched his fist. The wall of water collapsed, but not back into the ocean. It fell forward, a man-made tsunami of biblical proportions, and crashed down upon the entire slaver fleet. The ships were splintered, shattered, and swallowed by the rage of the ocean, dragged to the bottom in an instant. In less than a minute, the invasion was over. The threat was annihilated. Naruto let the power recede, the golden fox fading away. He stood on the shore, the picture of calm, as if he had done nothing more strenuous than skipping a stone. He turned and began to walk back toward the city. The women of Amazon Lily, who had run to the cliffs to witness the battle, could only stare, their bows lowered, their minds struggling to comprehend what they had just seen. He had saved them. The man they had tried to execute had saved them all. Night fell on a transformed Amazon Lily. The hostility was gone, replaced by a mixture of awe, reverence, and confusion. Naruto sat by a large fire in the center of the city, calmly eating a piece of roasted sea beast. Nami and Robin sat with him, now treated as honored guests. The Kuja warriors kept their distance, whispering amongst themselves, occasionally stealing glances at the man who commanded the sea. Boa Hancock had secluded herself in her palace, refusing to see anyone. Elder Nyan, the tiny, former empress of the island, approached Naruto's group. She bowed low, a gesture of profound respect. "We owe you a debt that can never be repaid," she said, her old eyes filled with wisdom. "You saved our nation. You saved our queen from a fate worse than death." "I just did what was right," Naruto said simply, taking another bite of food. Nyan studied him. "The Empress, she has locked herself away. The secret of her past, she believes it has stripped her of her right to rule." Naruto sighed and stood up. "Where is she?" Nyan pointed to the highest spire of the palace. "She will see no one. She'll see me," Naruto said. He walked toward the palace, the crowd of women parting for him like the sea. He entered the opulent halls and made his way to Hancock's private chambers. The guards at the door, Hancock's own sisters, tried to stop him. "The Empress has forbidden anyone from entering," Sandersonia said, taking a defensive stance. Naruto just looked at them, his blue eyes gentle. "She's in pain. I can help." His voice held no threat, only a quiet certainty that disarmed them completely. They stepped aside and let him pass. He found Hancock on a balcony, staring out at the jungle. Her back was to him. She was wearing a simple silk robe, and he could see the faint outline of the brand through the fabric. The hoof of the celestial dragon. The mark of a slave. She didn't turn as he approached. "Have you come to mock me?" she asked, her voice brittle. "To see the pirate empress, for what she truly is. A runaway slave, a fraud." "No," Naruto said, stopping a few feet away. He didn't look at her back, at the brand. He looked at her. "I came because I know what it feels like to be branded." She stiffened. "My brand wasn't on my skin," he continued, his voice soft. "It was on my soul. From the day I was born. I was a Jinchuriki, a human sacrifice. I carried a monster inside me that wasn't my choice. The villagers, they didn't see me. They saw the monster. They saw the brand. They called me a demon and threw stones at me when I was a child." Hancock slowly turned, her eyes wide. She was seeing him for the first time, not as a man, but as a person. "I know what it's like to have a part of you that you hate," he went on, "a part of you that the world despises, a part that makes you feel like you're less than human. I know what it's like to build walls so high no one see." and ever get close enough to see the real you. He met her gaze, his own eyes full of a shared, painful understanding. That mark on your back, he said, finally acknowledging it, that's not a symbol of your shame. It's a symbol of your survival. You endured the deepest hell imaginable and you came out the other side. You built a kingdom to protect the people you love. You're not a fraud, Hancock. You're a survivor. And you're a queen. Quote. Tears streamed down Hancock's face, silent and hot. The arrogant, cold mask of the Empress dissolved completely, revealing the vulnerable, wounded woman beneath. He wasn't disgusted. He wasn't pitying her. He understood. He was the first person in her entire life who had looked at her brand and seen strength instead of shame. In that moment, the infamous L.O.V. sickness that afflicted the Kuja Empresses struck her. But it wasn't the shallow adoration she inspired in others. It was a deep, resonant connection, a bond forged in the crucible of shared pain and mutual respect. She saw in him not just a savior, but a kindred spirit, the only other person in the world who could possibly understand the weight she carried. Naruto, she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. Later that night, the three women of the Maelstrom, one newly christened, sat on the repaired deck of their ship. Amazon Lily's finest shipwrights had worked tirelessly, replacing their mast and reinforcing the hull as a small token of their gratitude. Hancock stood on the dock, watching them. She had declared to her people that she would be joining Naruto's crew, a decision that had shocked them but which they ultimately accepted. She would not be an empress abandoning her throne, but a queen protecting her new family. The dynamic was tense. So, she's coming with us, Nami said flatly, polishing her klima tact with more vigor than was necessary. Her knowledge of the world government's inner workings and her status as a warlord could be invaluable, Robin noted, ever the pragmatist. Though even she seemed a bit uncertain. Hancock, for her part, was glaring daggers at both of them, seeing them as rivals for Naruto's attention. Naruto, sensing the impending explosion, stepped into the middle of it. He looked at the three of them, Nami, the brilliant navigator who was his moral and practical compass, Robin, the wise historian who held the keys to the truth of the world, and Hancock, the powerful warrior queen who was his unshakable shield. This won't work if we're fighting each other, he said, his voice firm but fair. He looked at Nami and Robin. Hancock is one of us now. She's family. Then he looked at Hancock. And they are my family, too. They were here first. He took a deep breath, looking between the three most powerful women he had ever met. Nami is my compass. Robin is my wisdom. Hancock, you are my shield. Alone, we're strong. But together, we can change the world. But only if we stand as one. No rivals. No jealousy. Just partners. Can you all agree to that? It was a bold, almost audacious proposition. But looking at him, at the sincere, unwavering belief in his eyes, they found it hard to argue. Nami sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Robin gave a small, enigmatic smile. Hancock, after a moment of internal struggle, gave a stiff, regal nod. It was a start. It was a fragile, complicated, and utterly insane arrangement. But as the Maelstrom pulled away from Amazon Lily, with the Empress of the Kuja standing on its deck, it felt like the beginning of something unstoppable. A new kind of crew. A new kind of family. A new kind of power in the world. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Celestial Gambit. The news spread like wildfire, carried on the wings of news coups and the whispers of sailors. The rogue blonde who had dismantled Arlong Park and defied a buster call had done the impossible again. He had recruited the pirate empress, Boa Hancock, to his fledgling crew. The world was reeling. He was no longer just a curiosity, he was a legitimate rising power, an anomaly that defied all classification. His bounty, once a respectable but not earth-shattering figure, skyrocketed overnight. The name, Naruto, was now spoken in the same breath as the worst generation, but with an air of greater mystery and dread. He had no grand fleet. He had no territory. He had a single, sturdy ship and a crew of 3 women who could, individually, bring nations to their knees. It was a concentration of power so absurd that the other major players on the Grand Line could no longer afford to ignore him. The invitation aimed via a hawk with a transponder snail strapped to its leg. It found them on the open sea, a week's sail from Amazon Lily. The message was from an interested party, proposing a parley on the neutral island of Sabayati Archipelago. The location was a crossroads of the world, a place where pirates, marines, and nobles coexisted in a tense, chaotic truce. It was the perfect place for a meeting, and the perfect place for an ambush. "It's a trap," Nami said instantly, her hand hovering over the reject button on the snail. "Of course it's a trap," Robin agreed, her eyes scanning the encrypted message, looking for tells. "The question is, who is setting it, and what is the bait?" Hancock scoffed, lounging on a deck chair like a queen on her throne, Salome her snake coiled at her feet. "Whoever they are fools. We should ignore this insult and sink their island for their impudence." Naruto took the message. He closed his eyes, his senses brushing against the faint hockey signature left on the paper by its author. It was sharp, clinical, like a surgeon's scalpel. And underneath it, a trace of something else, something wild and chaotic. Not one signature, but two. "Trafalgar Law and Eustace Kid," Naruto announced, opening his eyes. "They're the ones who sent it. But they're not the only ones who will be there. The invitation feels crowded." "The Surgeon of Death and Captain Kidd," Robin murmured. "Two of the most notorious supernovas. Law is a strategist. Kidd is a barbarian. An unlikely alliance." "They don't want to ally with us," Naruto corrected. "They want to measure us. To see if the stories are true. And someone else is using their curiosity as a cover." He tapped the transponder snail. "We're going." "Naruto," Nami exclaimed, horrified. "Are you insane? Walking into a trap set by two of the worst generation, which is probably also a trap set by someone else. This is the definition of reckless." "It's not reckless, it's proactive," he countered, his gaze firm. "We've made enemies of the world government. They're not just going to let us sail around freely. They're going to come for us. Sooner or later, we have to face them. I'd rather do it on our terms, on a battlefield of our choosing. When they don't know that we know they're coming." His logic was sound, and frighteningly so. Hancock, despite her initial bluster, saw the challenge in his eyes and straightened up. A predatory glint in her own. Robin nodded slowly, her mind already calculating the strategic implications. Nami, ever the voice of caution, let out a long, frustrated sigh. "Fine," she said, snatching a chart. "But if we're walking into a war zone, I'm choosing the terrain." Sabayati Archipelago was a series of massive mangrove trees that rose from the ocean, their roots so colossal they formed islands. The air was thick with the scent of resin and the buzz of activity. Bubbles drifted up from the roots, creating a surreal, beautiful landscape that masked a rotten core. It was a place where the law was flimsy. Dreams were sold, and slavery was a booming, open business under the protection of the celestial dragons. Naruto felt the island's sickness the moment they arrived. The casual cruelty, the despair of the slave auctions, the arrogant, untouchable presence of the world nobles. It reminded him of Arlong Park, but on a global scale. It made his blood boil. "Stay on the ship," he ordered his crew as they docked in a secluded grove. His voice was cold. "And don't leave it, for any reason." "What are you going to do?" Hancock asked, sensing the barely suppressed rage radiating from him. "Reconnaissance," he said, his blue eyes hard as ice. "I want to feel this place. I want to know where every piece on the board is before the game starts." He stepped off the maelstrom and dissolved into the bustling crowds, a ghost in plain sight. He didn't need to ask questions or listen to rumors. He walked through the lawless zones, past the human shops, near the auction houses. He let his sage hockey drink it all in. He felt the arrogance of the celestial dragons, puffed up and hollow, their power entirely derived from their station. He felt the fear of the populace, the simmering resentment of the other pirates. He pinpointed the location of the meeting. Grove 44, an old, abandoned shipyard. He felt Law's cool, calculating presence there, and Kid's volatile, crackling energy. And then he felt the others. They were hiding, their presences masked, but not well enough. He felt them like cold spots in the vibrant tapestry of the island. Dozens of them, elite Marines, their hockey honed and disciplined. They were positioned on the rooftops, in the surrounding groves, a perfect kill box. And in the center of their web, a presence that made the air itself feel thin and sterile. It was a void, a being of perfect, unnerving order. Naruto recognized the signature instantly from the faint echo he'd felt on the invitation. The man in white. The one from Mariajoy. The world government hadn't sent a cipher pull unit. They had sent their trump card. Naruto returned to the ship an hour later, his expression grim. The trap is set, he told his crew, who had gathered around the tactical table in the galley. Law and Kid are the bait. The Marines have the entire grove surrounded. And they brought their monster. Robin's face was grim. My sources on the island have been talking. A new unit has been formed, answering directly to the 5 elders. An anti-deity task force. They're led by a man known only as Judex. They say he wields the power of absolute order. He's here, Naruto confirmed. I can feel him. His power, it's the opposite of mine. Where my energy feels like life, his feels like a cage. So we abort, Nami said, her voice strained. We leave now. We let Law and Kid get captured or killed. It's not our problem. It is our problem, Naruto countered. The moment we declared Robin under our protection, everything became our problem. The government is making a statement here. They're using 2 of the world's most infamous pirates as bait to eliminate us. If we run, we show them we're afraid. We become fugitives, always on the defensive. But if we turn their trap back on them, if we win here, today, in front of the whole world, we show them we are not just another pirate crew. We show them we are a power equal to them. He looked at each of them. This is our chance to stop running. This is our chance to declare ourselves. A fire lit in Hancock's eyes. A battle to shake the heavens. I approve. Robin gave a small, dangerous smile. It would certainly send a message. Nami looked from their determined faces to Naruto's unwavering resolve. She sighed, her fear giving way to a familiar, exasperated pragmatism. I'm going to need a lot of lightning, she muttered, already pulling out the components for her Kleem attack. And a lot more money when this is over. Grove 44 was a graveyard of rusting ships and dilapidated warehouses. In the center of a large clearing, Trafalgar Law leaned against his Nodashi, his spotted cap pulled low. His crew waited a short distance away. Across from him, Eustace Kid stood with his arms crossed, his metallic arm glinting. His crew a collection of snarling brutes. The air between them crackled with tension. He's late, Kid growled, his voice like grinding metal. Patience, Eustace Law replied. His tone calm and analytical. A man with a reputation like his doesn't operate on other people's schedules. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the shadows of a massive, half-built galleon. Sorry about that, had to check the guest list. You two invited a few too many people. Naruto stepped out into the clearing, alone. He wasn't walking with bravado or aggression. He moved with the casual confidence of a man walking into his own home. Kid's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? He means the 200 elite Marines currently surrounding this grove, a new voice said. Robin emerged from another shadow, a book in her hand, and the special unit of vice admirals on the eastern route. Not to mention the artillery cannons aimed at every exit, Nami added, appearing on a nearby rooftop. Her Kleem attack already assembled. A rather clumsy trap, Hancock finished, descending gracefully from the rigging of a ship, her presence so commanding that even Kid's crew took an involuntary step back. Hardly worthy of an empress. Law and Kid were stunned. Their crews drew their weapons, looking around wildly. They had been so focused on each other that they hadn't sensed the larger threat. Naruto's crew had not only detected the ambush but had already moved into position, weaving through the marine cordon as if it wasn't there. You knew? Law asked, his composure finally cracking. He looked at Naruto, his analytical mind struggling to process how he had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. I told you, Naruto said with a shrug. I felt you, and I felt them. At that moment, the trap was sprung. Floodlights ignited, bathing the shipyard in harsh, white light. From every rooftop, from behind every crate, hundreds of Marines emerged, their rifles leveled. Leading them were 5 vice admirals, each a powerhouse in their own right. And descending from the largest mangrove root, as if walking on air, was a figure cloaked in immaculate white. His face was hidden by a hood, but the aura he projected was suffocating. It was an aura of pure, absolute order. This was Judex, Uzumaki Naruto. Judex's voice was not human. It was synthesized, cold, and utterly devoid of emotion. By order of the 5 elders, you and your accomplices are sentenced to erasure for crimes against the world's balance. He raised a hand. The air in the shipyard seemed to solidify. The chaotic energy crackling around Kid sputtered and died. The bubbles rising from the mangrove roots froze in place. It was a field of absolute negation. My devil fruit, Kid snarled, trying to manipulate the metal around him and finding his power completely inert. Law tried to activate his own ability, but nothing happened. The space around him refused to obey. Judex's power was not to nullify devil fruits like sea prism stone. It was to impose a state of absolute, natural order, a state in which such unnatural powers simply could not exist. Naruto, however, just tilted his head, curious. His own power, his haki, his life force, was not a devil fruit. It was fundamental. It was not affected. That's a neat trick, he commented, his voice casual. Judex seemed to register this, he void of his presence focusing entirely on Naruto. The Asura anomaly. Your existence is a flaw in the fabric of reality. A chaotic variable that must be zeroed out. You talk like a machine, Naruto noted. He turned his head slightly. Nami, now, you got it, Captain. Nami grinned. She held up her Klima tact. A small, dark cloud formed above her. Thunder tempo. A massive bolt of lightning, far larger than anything her staff should be able to produce, lanced down from the sky. But it didn't strike the Marines. It struck the highest mangrove root, where Naruto had sensed a massive concentration of resin. The root exploded in a brilliant, blinding flash of light and a deafening boom. For a moment, everyone, Marine, Pirate, and Supernova, was blinded and deafened. It was the perfect signal. In that moment of sensory chaos, the battle began, but not in the clearing. Robin, from her perch, spoke a single word. Gigantsko Mono. 2 colossal hands, made of thousands of smaller, sprouted arms, erupted from the shadows behind the vice admirals, slamming them together like cymbals. Hancock moved like a blur, a whirlwind of kicks and strikes, her haki-infused attacks sending dozens of elite Marines flying before they even knew what had hit them. Her power wasn't a devil fruit, it was her inherent strength, and it was unaffected. Law and Kid, their own crews now under attack, were forced to fight. Even without their devil fruits, they were formidable warriors, cutting and smashing their way through the rank-and-file Marines. The entire ambush had been turned on its head in seconds. The hunters had become the hunted. The true battle was in the center of the clearing. Judex, his negation field still active, moved towards Naruto. He didn't run. He glided, a being of unnatural grace. Blades of pure, white, concussive force formed in his hands. Your chaos ends now, he stated. He lunged, his blades slashing faster than the eye could see. Naruto met him, not with a weapon, but with his bare hands. Coated in the dense, black sheen of his armament haki. The clash was unlike any other. It wasn't the clang of metal or the boom of explosions. It was the sound of 2 opposing realities grinding against each other. Naruto's every movement was fluid, creative, chaotic, a storm of motion. Judex's was perfect, economical, geometric, a machine executing a flawless program. Naruto's golden life force flared, pushing back against the oppressive aura of order. Judex's negation field flickered. In that instant, Law and Kid felt their powers return. Shambles. Law swapped a group of Marines with a pile of rusty anchors, crushing them. Repel. Kid blasted a wave of soldiers back with a powerful magnetic pulse. They looked at each other, then at the chaotic battle Naruto's crew was orchestrating. They had been used as bait, but they had also been saved. The fight between Naruto and Judex escalated. They were a blur of gold and white, their impact sending shockwaves had cracked the very ground beneath them. As Naruto parried one of Judex's force blades, their arms locked. For a fraction of a second, their powers, the Asura and the Diva, resonated. Naruto's mind was flooded with a vision. A sterile white room, a young boy with blank eyes, being forced to watch films of war, famine, and chaos. A voice, Saturn's voice, whispering, "This is the world of freedom. This is the disease. You will be the cure." At the same time, Judex staggered back, clutching his head. He had seen a flash of a blonde child, covered in mud, being called a monster by sneering villagers but responding not with hate, but with a cheery, defiant grin. They broke apart, both breathing heavily, shaken by the unexpected contact. They were two sides of the same coin, forged in pain, but set on diametrically opposed paths. One taught to hate chaos, the other who had embraced it and found strength within it. What was that? Judex whispered, the first hint of emotion, of confusion, entering his synthesized voice. A glimpse of the truth, Naruto replied, his expression grim. They lied to you. They didn't show you the laughter. They didn't show you the love. They only showed you the pain. Before Judex could process this, a signal flare, a brilliant blue, shot into the sky. It was Nami's signal. The trap was broken, the enemy was in disarray. It was time to go. This is over, Naruto declared. He slammed his hands on the ground. Sage art. Earth prison. The ground beneath the remaining marines turned to mud, then shot up, forming a massive dome of hardened earth, trapping the bulk of their forces, including the dazed vice-admirals, inside. Let's move, Naruto called out. His crew disengaged instantly, melting back into the shadows as they had come. Law and Kid, seeing their chance, also ordered their crews to retreat, vanishing into the chaos of the archipelago. Judex was left standing alone in the wrecked shipyard, outside the earthen dome. He looked at the prison, then at his hands, then in the direction Naruto had fled. The vision of the smiling, defiant child was burned into his mind, a piece of chaotic data that his ordered world could not compute. He brought a hand to his comm link. Report, he said, his voice once again cold and mechanical, but with a new, almost imperceptible tremor beneath it. The Asura is incomplete, but his will is pure. The mission was a failure. In Mariajoy, Saint Saturn listened, a steeple of his fingers under his chin. He wasn't angry, he was intrigued. A failure? No, he murmured to the empty room. The resonance has begun. The first crack has appeared in his will. We did not need to break his body. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. We only need to break his spirit. And now, we know how. The impurity will come, break his hope, and the fruit will be ours to control. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Whispers of the Void. The Sabayati incident had sent shockwaves through the world government and the pirate world alike. A carefully laid trap by an elite marine force, led by the mysterious Judex, had not only failed but had been spectacularly turned on its head. The Maelstrom crew hadn't just survived. They had dictated the terms of the battle and vanished without a scratch. Their bounties climbed to heights that were no longer just notorious but legendary. Naruto was now unofficially, and grudgingly, recognized as a new, unaligned Emperor-class threat, a Fifth Emperor, a title that made him groan every time he heard it. But fame was a cage, and Naruto had no interest in being its prisoner. Their true quest had become clearer than ever. Judex and his diva power were a mirror to Naruto's own Asura abilities. The resonance they'd experienced wasn't an accident. To understand their enemy, to understand the path forward, they needed to understand the past. They needed to find the truth of the Void Century. Robin's lifelong dream had become their crew's singular mission. The problem was, the path to that truth was not on any map. The location of the final red poneglyph, the key to reaching Raftel, was a complete mystery. The log is useless, Nami announced, frustration clear in her voice. She tapped the log pose on her wrist, its needle spinning erratically. We need a new heading, a clue. The trail has gone cold. They were adrift in the new world, a sea even more treach, ruse and unpredictable than the Grand Line. The islands here were ruled by the Yonko, and to sail blindly was to invite annihilation. Robin, who had been cross-referencing a dozen historical texts and rubbings of previous poneglyphs, looked up from her work. There is a legend, she said slowly, a story dismissed by most scholars as folklore. It speaks of a phantom island, one that is not made of earth but of flesh and bone. An island that lives. Hancock, sharpening her kunai with a whetstone, looked intrigued. A living island. Preposterous. The legend says it roams the new world, never staying in one place, Robin continued. And that it carries a secret of the ancient past on its back. It is called Zo. Naruto, who had been meditating at the ship's prow, opened his eyes. He had been expanding his senses. trying to catch a whisper of a clue on the chaotic winds of the new world. He focused on Robin's words. A living island. It resonated with him. There's a special log pose, Nami recalled from her studies. One that doesn't point to magnetic fields, but to a specific, unique biological signature. It's the only way to track a moving target like that. But they're incredibly rare. We don't need one, Naruto said, standing up. He closed his eyes again, his concentration deepening. The world of sight and sound faded, replaced by the symphony of life. He pushed his senses outward, farther than ever before. Across hundreds of miles of open ocean. He wasn't looking for a magnetic field. He was listening for a heartbeat. A very, very big one. He sifted through the noise. The titanic clashes of sea kings in the abyss, the collective life force of entire island ecosystems, the distant thrum of Yonko fleets. It was like trying to find a single voice in a global choir. But he was persistent. He followed a thread of immense, ancient sorrow, a feeling he had only touched upon briefly before. The sound of weeping, but this was older, deeper. A mourning that had lasted for 1,000 years. There, he whispered, his eyes snapping open. He pointed to the northeast. It's far, weeks away, but I hear it, a great, slow, tired heartbeat. And it's crying. His crew stared at him. A familiar mixture of awe and disbelief on their faces. He was going to navigate them to a mythical phantom island by listening to its feelings from across the ocean. Well, Nami said, Brea. King the silence as she began adjusting the sails. It's a heading. Let's hope it's not just a very depressed whale. The journey was long and perilous. They navigated through territories patrolled by Big Mom's and Kaido's fleets, using Naruto's incredible sensory range to detect them from hundreds of miles away and Nami's genius to plot courses through treacherous, monster-filled waters that even the Emperor's ships avoided. It was a masterclass in stealth and navigation, a silent dance through the world's most dangerous sea. After 3 weeks of relentless sailing, they saw it. Or rather, He felt its presence before it was visible. A fog bank, thick and permanent, hung on the horizon. And as they drew closer, a shape began to emerge from the mist, a shape so colossal, so impossible, that it defied all reason. It was an elephant of impossible size, its legs stretching down for miles into the unseen depths of the ocean, its back a vast, forested plateau. It walked through the sea, each step a slow, deliberate, ancient movement. This was Zo. By the sea, Nami breathed, her hand gripping the rail, her cartographer's mind struggling to comprehend the scale of what she was seeing. So the legends were true. Robin whispered, her eyes wide with a scholar's wonder. Naruto's expression was one of profound sadness. Now that they were close, the feeling was overwhelming. It was a tide of guilt, of sorrow, of an unending penance. The elephant, Zunesha, was not just walking. It was serving a sentence. Getting onto the island was their next challenge. There was no harbor, no shore. Just a sheer, 1,000-mile-high leg of wrinkled gray skin. As they pondered this, a massive trunk swung down from the mists above, stopping just short of their ship. A jet of water sprayed from its tip, creating a brief, shimmering rainbow. It knows we're here, Hancock observed. It is, inviting us up. Naruto looked up at the colossal, ancient eye that peered down at them through the fog. He felt a direct, conscious thought brush against his mind. Not in words, but in pure intent. Welcome, voice of the dawn. It wants to talk, Naruto said. He created a dozen shadow clones. We'll use the clones and ropes to get everyone up. Let's go. The ascent was dizzying, but they finally pulled themselves over the edge and onto the ground of Zo. They were in a dense, ancient forest. The air was thick and humid, alive with the chirps and calls of strange creatures. Before they could get their bearings, they were surrounded. Figures dropped from the trees, silent and graceful. They were humanoid animals. A dog in a dress, a bull in armor, a monkey with a sword. The mink tribe. They were led by a canine mink in a sharp suit and a feline mink in royal robes. Duke Dogstorm and Master Cat Viper. Halt. Dogstorm commanded, his hand on the hilt of his sword. State your business on Zo, humans. His eyes were wary, but not immediately hostile. The island had recently suffered a devastating attack by one of Kaido's commanders, and they were on high alert. Before Naruto could speak, the ground beneath them trembled slightly. A voice, ancient and vast, echoed not in their ears, but directly in their minds. It was Zunesha itself. "They are welcome, my masters. The one who hears my voice walks among them." Every mink, from the dukes down to the smallest child, dropped to one knee, their heads bowed. Their expressions were a mixture of shock and profound reverence. Only a select few, like Kazuki Momonosuke, had ever been able to hear Zunesha's voice. For a stranger to do so was an unprecedented event. Dogstorm looked up at Naruto, his suspicion replaced by awe. You can hear him. I can feel him," Naruto corrected gently. "And I can feel his pain. He's been walking for a very long time." That simple statement of empathy sealed it. The minks recognized him not as an intruder, but as a kindred spirit. They were escorted not as prisoners, but as honored guests, to the heart of their civilization. The whale forest, there, hidden inside a colossal, ancient tree, was what they had come for. A massive, blood-red cube of indestructible stone, covered in intricate, alien script. The road poneglyph. Robin stepped forward, her hand outstretched, her expression one of sacred reverence. This was the culmination of her mother's sacrifice, of her 20 years on the run. This was a piece of the true history. She began to read, her voice a low, steady murmur as she translated the ancient language. The poneglyph detailed a map coordinate, one of the 4 points that would lead to Raftel. But it contained another, far more shocking secret. Robin's voice faltered. She looked up from the stone, her face pale. This can't be. What is it, Robin?" Naruto asked, sensing her distress. "It's a history," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "A warning. It speaks of the final days of the Void Century. Of the great war between the ancient kingdom and T20 kingdoms that would form the world government." She took a shaky breath. "It says the leader of the ancient kingdom, the man they called Joyboy, he was the wielder of a mythical power. The power of the Asura." A heavy silence fell over the group. Naruto's own codename for his abilities. A coincidence. And his greatest adversary. Robin continued, her eyes wide with dawning horror as she looked at Naruto. "The man who led the 20 kingdoms, who founded the system of the celestial dragons, he wielded a power that was the Asura's perfect opposite. A power of absolute order and subjugation. The power of the diva. The pieces slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a new conflict. It was an ancient cycle, a war that had been waged 1,000 years ago. Naruto and Judex were not just rivals. They were inheritors of a cosmic struggle. "It gets worse," Robin whispered, turning back to the stone. "The poneglyph says that the One Piece, the great treasure of Joyboy, is not gold or jewels. It's a device, an artifact of the ancient kingdom. The Will Forger. It says, it has the power to impose the will of its user upon the very laws of reality. To rewrite the world." The implication was staggering. The One Piece was not a treasure to be found, but a weapon to be wielded. A tool that could create a world of absolute freedom, or one of absolute slavery. "That's why the government has hidden the history," Nami breathed, connecting the dots. "If the world knew that a single artifact could grant that kind of power, it would be chaos. A war to end all wars. And those 2 fruits, the Asura and the Diva," Hancock added, her hand resting on her blade, "they are the keys. The keys to controlling it." This was the truth of the Void Century. Not just a hidden history, but the secret of a reality-bending superweapon. And they were standing right in the middle of it. The moral dilemma was crushing. Robin's dream was to share the truth with the world. To let the light of history shine on the lies of the government. But this truth was a lit match over a planet-sized powder keg. "We have to tell them," Robin argued, her voice filled with a desperate passion. "It is the people's right to know what was stolen from them. It is my life's purpose." "And what happens the day after, Robin?" Nami countered, her voice sharp with fear. "Every pirate, every king, every revolutionary from here to the Red Line would be in a mad dash to find the One Piece. It would be global anarchy. Millions would die. Is your truth worth that price? It is a power we could use," Hancock declared, her eyes blazing with ambition. "We could secure Amazon Lily forever. We could bring the world nobles to their knees and make them pay for their crimes. We should seize this power for ourselves." The 3 women looked at Naruto. The historian who wanted truth. The navigator who wanted peace. The queen who wanted justice. He was caught in the center of their conflicting ideals. His decision would set the course for the rest of their lives, and possibly the world. Naruto was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the red poneglyph. He felt the weight of 1,000 years of history. The echoes of Joy Boy's struggle, the chilling ambition of the first diva. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm and resolute, cutting through the tension. "You're all right," he said. They stared at him, confused. "Robin, the world does deserve the truth," he said, turning to her. "But Nami is right. The world as it is now would tear itself apart with that truth. It's not ready." He then looked at Hancock. "And you are right, too. This power cannot be left for the government to reclaim. But we cannot use it to become the very tyrants we despise." He took a deep breath, his decision made. "So, we will do all three. We will find the One Piece. We will take control of it and the diva fruit from the world government. We will disarm them, but we will not use it." "Not use it?" Hancock asked, incredulous. "No," Naruto said, his eyes filled with a powerful, unwavering conviction. "We will become its guardians. We will hold the dawn in our hands, and we will wait. We will guide the world, protect it, and help it heal from the shadows of the government. We will be the shepherds of the new era. And when the world is finally ready, when it has learned to stand on its own without masters, then we will give it the truth, and the choice of its own future." It was an answer none of them had expected. It was not a path of conquest, or truth, or peace. It was a path of immense, selfless responsibility. A burden greater than any of them could have imagined. As they stood there, processing his words, a cold, familiar presence intruded upon the sanctity of the whale forest. One of the minks, a small rabbit who had been injured in Jack's attack and wore a bandage with a strange symbol on it, began to tremble. A visual Den Den Mushi he was carrying activated, projecting a distorted holographic image into the air. The image solidified, showing the face of Saint Jagarcia Saturn, sitting in his office in Mariajoy. The bandage on the mink's arm had been a tracking and listening device. He had heard everything. "A noble sentiment, Uzumaki Naruto," Saturn said, his voice a chillingly calm whisper that carried across the clearing. He wasn't yelling or threatening. He was reasoning, and it was far more terrifying. "Shepherds of the Dawn, how poetic. Your predecessor, Joy Boy, had a similar dream." Saturn leaned forward, his ancient eyes pinning Naruto in place. "But have you considered why he failed? Mankind is a child that will burn itself alive if given the matches of true freedom. I am the parent who keeps those matches locked away. For 800 years, my order has prevented global self-destruction. It may not be pretty. It may not be fair. But it is stable. Your Joy Boy predecessor would have burned the world down for his beautiful ideals. He was a sentimental fool." He paused, letting his words sink in, a poison dart aimed at the very heart of Naruto's philosophy. "The question you must ask yourself is, will you be one, too?" The transmission cut out, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The physical battles they had fought were nothing compared to this. Saturn hadn't attacked their bodies. He had attacked their purpose, planting a seed of doubt that threatened to poison the very foundation of their new dream. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Gilded Cage. The confrontation with Saturn's hologram left a chilling pall over the crew. His words were a toxin, seeping into the cracks of their newfound purpose. He hadn't dismissed their dream, he had validated its potential for catastrophe, framing their quest for freedom as a path to global annihilation. For the first time, the sheer, crushing weight of their ambition felt real. They left Zou with the coordinates from the road poneglyph, but their mood was somber. The path to Raftel was no longer just an adventure. It was a race against an enemy who was not only powerful, but intelligent and ideologically certain. The world government didn't wait long to make its move. But it wasn't a frontal assault. It was something far more insidious, a move straight from Saturn's playbook of surgical cruelty. The news reached them via a frantic Den Den Mushi call from Marguerite on Amazon Lily. It was Hancock's sister, Sandersonia, her voice tight with panic. "Hancock-sama, it's a plague. A strange sickness is sweeping through the island. It started a week ago. First a fever, then paralysis. The elders say it's nothing they've ever seen. Our healers are powerless." Hancock was on her feet instantly, her face a mask of cold fury and fear. How many are afflicted? Dozens, sister. And it is spreading fast. But that is not all. Sandersonia's voice dropped to a choked whisper. The Kuja scout ship we sent for supplies, it was captured. A marine fleet intercepted them. They are holding our sisters. Hancock-sama. They sent a message. A piece of paper rustled on the other end. Sandersonia read it aloud, her voice trembling with rage. The antidote to the lily plague is in our possession. The prisoners are safe, for now. Both will be waiting at Impel Down. The line went dead. Nami cursed, slamming her fist on the table. It's a trap, a manufactured crisis. They poisoned your home, Hancock. And they're using your sisters as bait to lure you into the most secure prison in the world, Robin added, her expression grim. They're not just trying to capture you. They're trying to break you. Hancock stood ramrod straight, her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. Her people were dying. Her sisters were captured. Everything she had sworn to protect was being held hostage. The enemy wasn't attacking her. They were attacking her heart. Naruto placed a hand on her shoulder. She was vibrating with a rage so potent he could feel it like a physical heat. Hancock, look at me. She turned, her eyes blazing. I will go. I will tear that prison down brick by brick. I will make them pay. We will go. Naruto corrected her, his voice a bedrock of calm in her storm of fury. We will get the antidote, and we will get your sisters back. This is what Saturn meant. He's not trying to beat us in a fight. He's trying to make us break our own rules. He wants to prove that our freedom leads to chaos and that we'll sacrifice anything to save our own. He looked at Nami and Robin, then back to Hancock. We're not going to play his game. We're not going to be reckless. We're not going on a rampage. This will be an infiltration. Surgical, precise. We get in, we get our people and the cure, and we get out. We show him that we can protect our family without burning the world down. His clarity cut through Hancock's rage, giving it focus. Nami's mind was already racing, calculating the impossible logistics. Robin began accessing her mental library of the prison's rumored layouts. The despair of a moment ago was replaced by a cold, sharp-edged determination. They had been presented with an impossible problem, and they were going to solve it. Impel Down is a fortress, Nami stated, unrolling a sea chart of the area. It's surrounded by a fleet, the Calm Belt, and a menagerie of sea kings. The only way in is through the gates of justice. There is another way, Robin interjected. Impel Down is a submerged tower. The main entrance is on the surface, but the structure extends deep underwater. There are service tunnels, drainage systems, vulnerabilities. But the blueprints are one of the world government's most guarded secrets. We don't need blueprints, Naruto said, his eyes closed as he pictured the prison, a place he'd only heard stories about. He focused, pushing his senses, trying to feel the structure itself. I can feel the flow of water around it. I can feel the pressure points. He opened his eyes. There's an outflow vent 400 feet down. It's for the boiling blood of level 4. It opens on a timer to release pressure. It's our way in. The plan was insane. They would have to navigate the maelstrom into the Calm Belt, approach the prison submerged, and enter through a vent that periodically flushed superheated water. It was a needle-threading exercise in the middle of a hurricane. I can do it, Nami said, a determined glint in her eyes. With our ship's coating and your ability to feel the currents, I can get us there. But once we're inside, we split up. Naruto took command. Robin, your skills are perfect for espionage. You'll infiltrate their security and communications center. Find the location of the antidote and Hancock's sisters. Create a system-wide blackout on my signal. Nami, you stay with the ship. We'll need a fast getaway, and you're the only one who can navigate us out of that hell. Hancock and I will be the strike team. We'll handle retrieval and any resistance. Hancock nodded, her rage now a focused, lethal weapon. The resistance will be dealt with. This was their answer to Saturn's gambit. Not rage, but precision. Not chaos, but strategy. They would walk into the lion's den not as prey, but as hunters. The approach was harrowing. Nami, using a bubble coating from Sabayati and her own peerless navigational skills, guided the maelstrom into the dark, silent depths of the Calm Belt. Naruto stood beside her at the helm, a living sonar, calling out the movements of the colossal sea kings that drifted past them like living mountains in the gloom. He didn't just sense their location. He projected a feeling of immense, sleepy authority, a silent command that told the beasts this tiny, bubble-wrapped ship was not food. They reached the foundations of Impel Down, a monstrous, submerged tower of black stone and steel. As Naruto had predicted, they found the outflow vent, a massive circular grate. The next flush cycle is in 5 minutes, he said, feeling the pressure building within the prison's bowels. When it opens, we'll have a window of about 90 seconds to get the ship inside before the backwash sucks us out. It was a terrifyingly small margin for error. Nami's hands were slick with sweat on the helm, but her eyes were steady. The moment the grate began to open, she pushed the ship's thrusters to their limit, piloting the maelstrom into the dark, narrow tunnel. They scraped through just as the cycle ended and the grate began to close, plunging them into the mechanical guts of the world's most feared prison. They moored the ship in a dark, cavernous maintenance conduit. The air was thick with the smell of salt, rust, and suffering. The distant, muffled screams of prisoners were a constant, horrifying ambience. Go, Naruto said. Robin melted into the shadows, a ghost in the machine. He and Hancock moved in the opposite direction, towards the prison's central shaft. Robin was a master of her craft. She moved through the service corridors unseen and unheard, sprouting eyes and ears on distant walls to map her path. She found the central security room, a hub of monitors and guards. A few sprouted hands later, the guards were unconscious, slumped over their consoles. Robin's fingers flew across the keyboards, her mind absorbing the prison's entire digital infrastructure. She found what they were looking for. Ikuja prisoners were being held in a special block on level 5, the freezing hell. But the antidote, it wasn't with them. Naruto, can you hear me? She whispered into a small, modified Den Mushi. Loud and clear, his voice came back, calm as ever. The prisoners are on 5. But the antidote is being held somewhere else. It's not on the prison schematics. It's a place designated, level 7. The Celestial Vault. It's a new addition, a personal holding area for sensitive assets. The warden's office is the only access point. And Naruto, the warden of Impel Down, is Judex. A brief silence. Of course he is, Naruto's voice replied, devoid of surprise. This was always about us. Change of plans. Hancock, you go to level 5. Get your sisters. I'll go to level 7. Robin, on my mark, you kill the lights. All of them. Understood. Robin and Hancock replied in unison. Hancock moved with the speed of a vengeful goddess, descending through the levels. The prisoners and guards she encountered were not met with a fight, but with a single, contemptuous glare. Her conqueror's haki, fueled by her righteous fury, was a wave of pure intimidation. Normal men and women simply fainted as she passed, their minds unable to process her overwhelming will. She was a storm of silent, beautiful fury, clearing a path to her family. Naruto moved upwards. He walked through the prison's main corridors as if he owned them. When guards tried to stop him, they were met with a single, precise chop to the neck or a gentle palm strike that sent them flying, unconscious but unharmed. He was not here to kill. He was here for the antidote. He reached the imposing doors of the warden's office. He didn't knock. He pushed, and the reinforced steel doors buckled and tore from their hinges. The office was stark, white, and sterile. And sitting behind a minimalist desk, as if expecting him, was Judex. He was not in his white cloak, but in a severe, black and white warden's uniform that did nothing to hide the suffocating aura of order that surrounded him. On the desk between them was a single, ornate box. The antidote. I knew you would come, Judex said, his synthesized voice as cold as ever. Chaos is drawn to order, as a moth to a flame. Quote, I'm just here to pick up my property, Naruto replied, his eyes on the box. This is not your property, Judex stated. It is a tool, a variable in a controlled experiment. Your attachment to your family is a flaw, a weakness that will inevitably lead to your destruction. I am here to demonstrate that. He stood up, and the room seemed to shrink, the Rye air becoming thick and hard to breathe. Your crew is scattered. Your shield is deep in the freezing hell. Your wisdom is isolated. And you, the chaotic heart, are here with me. Trapped. You think this is your cage? Naruto said with a small, dangerous smile. You've got it backwards. You're locked in here with me. Robin, now, he said into his calm. Every light in Impel Down, from the fires of level 4 to the emergency lights in the hallways, went out. The prison was plunged into absolute, pitch-black darkness. For anyone else, it would be disorienting. For Naruto, it was home field advantage. In the dark, with his sage haki, he could see everything. Every movement, every breath, every heartbeat. Judex, however, was suddenly blind. Naruto moved. He didn't attack. He grabbed the box with the antidote from the desk. Judex reacted instantly, lashing out with his force blades into the darkness where Naruto had been. But he was gone. You cannot run, Judex yelled, a hint of frustration in his voice. He unleashed his power, and a wave of pure order swept through the room, attempting to flatten everything, to impose stillness. But Naruto was no longer in the room. He had Ulrea. Dai phased through the wall into the corridor. He was faster, more fluid, his movements guided by an intuition that Judex's rigid logic could not predict. He met up with Hancock in the central shaft. She had her sisters with her, along with the rest of the Kuja crew. They were weak, but alive. Hancock's presence had reinvigorated them. Let's go home, Naruto said, holding up the box. But their escape was not to be so simple. As they raced back towards the maintenance conduit where the maelstrom was hidden, the prison began to shake violently. Massive steel bulkheads slammed down, sealing off the corridors. A new voice, a familiar, chilling whisper, echoed from the prison's PA system. It was Saturn. Well done, Uzumaki Naruto. You retrieved the bait, but did you really think I would build a cage with only one lock? On the security monitors, which flickered back to life, Saturn's smiling face appeared. The plague was the bait for Hancock. The prisoners were the bait for you. And the antidote. The antidote was the bait for Judex's real test. And you have passed. You have proven you are a threat that must be erased. Naruto's eyes widened. He felt it. A massive energy signature building in the prison's lower levels. A bomb. Not a normal bomb. It felt like a compressed sphere of C-prism stone energy. It wouldn't just destroy the prison. It would create a dead zone for any devil fruit user, or haki user, for miles. He's going to sink the whole prison, Naruto breathed. With us inside, they were trapped. The bulkheads were sealed, the bomb was ticking, and even if they could get out, the entire marine fleet was waiting for them on the surface. Saturn had played them all. He had used his own top agent as a pawn, luring all his targets into a single, inescapable death trap. From the warden's office, Judex watched the monitors, his face unreadable. He had been a pawn, an instrument in a test. His entire purpose had been to act as a catalyst for Naruto's entrapment. The truth Naruto had spoken of, the lies of the government, it was all crashing down on him. The prison groaned, the foundations beginning to crack under the pressure of the impending explosion. The crew was cornered, deep in the bowels of the collapsing prison, with the sea and the entire Marine Navy waiting to crush them. Saturn's laughter, cold and triumphant, echoed from the speakers. Checkmate. Shepherd of the Dawn. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Emperor of a New Dawn. The world was ending. That's what it felt like in the guts of Impel Down. The structure groaned around them, the death rattle of a dying beast. Red emergency lights pulsed, casting long, dancing shadows that made the sealed corridor feel like a throat about to close. The air crackled with the energy of Saturn's ticking bomb. A pressure that promised not just death, but utter negation. Hancock's sisters and the other Kuja warriors were weak from their captivity, their fear a palpable tremor in the air. Nami's frantic voice crackled over the calm. Naruto. The outer walls are buckling. The sea pressure is going to crush us before the bomb even goes off. I can't hold the ship's position. It's over, Hancock whispered, not with despair, but with a cold, hard rage. She looked at her sisters, then at Naruto. Get the antidote to my island. Use your power. Go. I will stay and hold them off. I will show them the fury of the Kuja. It was a queen's sacrifice, an offer to trade her life for her people's. Naruto looked at her, then at the terrified faces of her crew. He looked at the sealed bulkhead, a slab of reinforced steel 10 feet thick. He felt Saturn's smug, triumphant certainty from miles away. The cold logic of the trap was perfect. Any rational being would be crushed by its despair. But Naruto was not a rational being. He was a creature of will. He placed the antidote box gently on the floor. "No one is staying," he said, his voice quiet, but cutting through the rising panic like a razor. "No one is dying today." He stepped in front of the bulkhead. He closed his eyes, and the frantic, chaotic energy around him seemed to still. He wasn't drawing on the natural energy of the world this time. He was drawing inward, pulling on the very core of his soul, the untamed, primordial power of the Asura fruit. "What is he doing?" Nami asked over the comm, her voice laced with awe and terror. A golden aura, brighter and more intense than anything they had ever seen, ignited around Naruto. It was not the gentle glow of his sage mode or the contained fire of his combat form. This was a raw, unrestrained inferno. The whisker marks on his cheeks deepened, becoming jagged and wild. His blonde hair seemed to catch fire, and his blue eyes burned with the light of a newborn star. 9 spectral, golden ILs of pure energy erupted from his back, whipping through the air with the force of a hurricane. This was not a man borrowing power. This was a god claiming his throne. He placed his hands on the cold steel of the bulkhead. "Saturn thinks he can cage us," Naruto's voice boomed, no longer just his own, but layered with an ancient, roaring echo. "He thinks his order is absolute." He pushed. The 10-foot-thick steel door did not bend or break. It dissolved. It turned to metallic sand under his touch, the atoms themselves unmaking their bonds in the face of his overwhelming will. He didn't just break the cage, he erased it. He walked through the newly created opening, the 9 tails of energy trailing behind him like a monarch's robes. "He's wrong." He kept walking, down the corridor, towards the source of the shaking. Towards the bomb. He didn't run. His pace was measured, absolute. With every step, bulkheads turned to dust before him. Walls melted away. The very structure of him fell down. The symbol of the world government's unshakable power, yielded to his advance. "Hancock, get your crew to the ship. Now," his voice commanded over the comm. "Nami, prepare to surface. We're leaving through the front door." Spurred by his impossible power, Hancock rallied her sisters and raced back towards the maelstrom. On the bridge of the ship, Nami stared at the monitor displaying Naruto's Fei signature, a blazing sun moving steadily through the prison. She took a deep, shaky breath and gripped the helm. "You heard him. Full power to the thrusters." Naruto reached the bottom level of the prison. Level 6, the Eternal Hell, was a frozen wasteland of legendary criminals. They fell silent as he passed, their hardened souls trembling before a power that dwarfed their own infamy. In the Y center of the prison's foundation was the bomb, a pulsating sphere of black energy that warped the air around it. He reached out and wrapped a hand of pure golden energy around it, containing the imminent explosion. Then, he looked up. Through a mile of stone and steel and seawater, he looked up. On the surface, the Marine fleet held its position, a perfect perimeter around the prison. On the deck of the lead battleship, a group of vice admirals watched the sea, waiting for the prison to implode. They felt it before they saw it. A tremor from the deep. The sea began to boil. Then, with a SUND that was not an explosion but the tearing of reality itself, the ocean parted. 2 massive walls of water, miles high, were pushed aside as if by an invisible god. And in the chasm between them, impelled down began to rise. Not crumbling, not exploding, but lifting. The entire submerged tower, a structure weighing billions oftens, was being raised from the seabed. Naruto stood at its foundation, his golden aura a star in the abyss. His power literally lifting the entire fortress on his shoulders. The maelstrom, coated in its bubble, ascended with it, a tiny ship riding on the back of a rising titan. The sight was broadcast to the world. The transponder snails on the marine ships, meant to record the prison's destruction, were instead showing an event that defied every known law of physics and warfare. A single man was holding back the sea and lifting a mountain of steel from its depths. On islands across the Grand Line, pirates and civilians watched their screens in stunned silence. In the Revolutionary Army's headquarters, Dragon leaned forward, his eyes wide. Atop the red line, the remaining 4 elders stared at their own monitor, their faces pale with disbelief. Saint Saturn, watching from his office, crushed the crystal glass in his hand, his perfect composure finally shattering. This wasn't a breakout. This was a declaration of godhood. Naruto gently set the prison down on the surface of the water. Where it bobbed unnaturally, held afloat by his power. He was still at its base, the sphere of the contained bomb still in his hand. He looked at the stunned marine fleet. Then he looked at the sky. He threw the bomb upwards. It sailed for miles into the atmosphere, a tiny black star. When it finally detonated, it was a silent, black flash that seemed to punch a hole in the sky itself. A void that swallowed the light before vanishing. The threat was gone. Naruto's nine-tailed form receded, the golden inferno condensing back into him. He looked tired, but he was standing. He leapt from the base of the prison, landing softly on the deck of the maelstrom, which now floated beside the captured fortress. His crew stared at him, their expressions a mix of profound relief and sheer, unadulterated awe. The silence of the sea was broken by a roar. Not from the marines, but from the horizon. A fleet of ships was approaching, fast. On their flags were the symbols of the Heart Pirates and the Kid Pirates. Law and Kid had come. Another ship, bearing the flag of the Sun Pirates, followed behind them, with a determined fish man at its helm. And from the other side, a fleet of Kuja warriors, led by Elder Nyan, having sailed from Amazon Lily the moment they heard the news. Law's submarine surfaced beside the maelstrom. "We figured you might need a hand, Uzumaki-ya," he said, a rare, genuine grin on his face. "Causing a scene this big tends to attract attention. You idiots are going to get us all killed." Kid yelled from his ship, though he was positioning his cannons to face the marines. They hadn't come to fight Naruto. They had come to fight with him. The events at Sabayati, the sheer audacity of this prison break, it had forged an unwilling alliance, a coalition of chaos against the rigid order of the world government. The lead vice admiral on the marine flagship finally found his voice. "All ships, fire." The final battle began, but it wasn't a battle. It was a rout. The combined might of two supernova crews, the Sun Pirates, and the Kuja warriors was already formidable. But with the Maelstrom crew at its heart, it was unstoppable. Nami commanded the weather, calling down lightning storms that disabled cannons and rogue waves that smashed ships together. Robin's sprouted limbs dismantled rigging and disarmed soldiers from 100 places at once. Hancock was a blur of kicks and petrifying beams, her beauty a weapon as deadly as any cannon. And in the center of it all was Naruto. He didn't need his nine-tailed form anymore. He moved from ship to ship, a golden blur of decisive, overwhelming force. He wasn't killing, he was disarming. He dismantled their cannons with a single touch, broke their masts with a flick of his wrist, and subdued entire crews with waves of his conqueror's haki. His most powerful weapon, however, was his will. His voice, amplified by his haki, rolled across the battlefield. "This fight is not with you," he roared at the common soldiers. "It's with the men who hide on a holy mountain and send you to die for their lies. We offer you a choice. Lay down your arms and live to see your families again. Or fig, HT for the men who see you as nothing but pawns. The dawn is coming. Choose which side of it you want to be on." His words, combined with the sight of a man who could part the sea, had a profound effect. Some Marines, their morale shattered, dropped their weapons. A few ships even turned and fled. The chain of command was broken not by force, but by hope. In the midst of the chaos, a single white ship cut through the battle, heading directly for the maelstrom. On its deck was Judex. His face was visible for the first time, his hood thrown back. He was young, with stark white hair and eyes that held a storm of conflicting emotions. He was no longer a machine. He was a man whose entire reality had been broken. He and Naruto met on the deck of the maelstrom, the war raging around them a distant backdrop. "Everything they told me was a lie," Judex said, his voice now his own, raw and human. "My purpose, my world, all of it. I know," Naruto said softly. "What do I do now?" Judex asked, the question of a man utterly lost. "Where do I go?" Naruto looked at the man who had been forged to be his perfect enemy. He didn't see a rival. He saw another victim. "That's the point," Naruto said. "You get to choose. For the first time. That's what freedom is." He didn't offer him a place on his crew. He didn't offer him forgiveness. He offered him a choice. Judex stared at him for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. He turned, leapt back to his ship, and sailed away, vanishing into the chaos of the battle, his path unwritten. With Judex gone and the marine fleet in disarray, the battle was over. The world government's greatest fortress had been captured, their elite forces defeated, and their authority shattered on a global stage. The story ends not with a grand party, but a quiet evening on the deck of the repaired Maelstrom, sailing away from the scene of their impossible victory. The Allied fleets had dispersed, their leaders now bound by a shared, unspoken understanding. The captured prison of Impel Down had been claimed by the revolutionaries who had appeared in the battle's aftermath, a new bastion of freedom in a world of turmoil. Nami was at the helm, her new charts spread before her. A confident smile on her face as she plotted their final course. "Raftel," she murmured, "it's real. We can get there." Robin sat nearby, reading from a poneglyph rubbing shish. Eid. Liberated, from the prison's hidden archives. For the first time in her life, her expression was one of pure, unburdened peace. The truth was within reach. Hancock was sparring with her sisters on the deck, their laughter bright and clear. Her nation was safe, her family was free. Her shield was no longer defensive, it was celebratory. Naruto stood at the prow, the setting sun casting a golden glow on his face. The three women, as if drawn by a silent call, came to stand with him. Nami on his right, Robin on his left, Hancock just behind, a silent, powerful guardian. There was no jealousy in their eyes, no rivalry. Only a shared sense of profound connection, a family forged in the crucible of impossible odds. They had faced the world's greatest power and won. They had a mission, a family, and a future they would build with their own hands. Naruto looked at the three incredible women beside him, his compass, his wisdom, his shield. He looked out at the horizon, where the last sliver of sun dipped below the waves. Promising a new day. "All right," he said, a wide, bright grin spreading across his face, full of the promise of adventure and the certainty of the man who had found his true place in the world. "Let's go see what this One Piece is all about." Chapter 7 End.